Oh,
See how quickly we can get out of this one. See how quickly we can get out of this item, and then I don't think the rest will take long. I think these are the biggest.
yeah. I hope it's by the time we're done. What? This is like twisted now. Okay, that's better.
Putting it over my attendance sheet is.
You don't know? I think I have
Oh,
mine.
maybe it's right
It's
here.
okay.
Oh, here it is. I left it here.
It's okay. I got it. I can just print you another one if you like.
Oh, this thing from Counselor I love.
Oh,
I mean,
now I can't find mine.
don't worry, I got mine.
I know, but I wonder what I have from the day from earlier today. Oh, here it is.
What's the motion? Has staff seen it?
No? I'm just going to leave. I haven't talked to her about it, so I'm just not sure what's going to happen now. Yeah, I'm just giving it to you because I know he hasn't seen it. Staff haven't seen it. No, it's she's amending part of this one. It's an insert as well. Oh, sorry, this one was, yeah, right, that was supposed to be meant as an insert, and no, it's not going to be inserted as a resolution. So I just want to make sure that I think they might be both. Oh, good afternoon. Would members of the Planning and Housing Committee please report to Committee Room 1 for quorum? Sure. Can you circulate these once they come out? Yeah.
So I'm giving the DCM and staff over there as well.
Yeah, it would be for the counselors' desks there first.
Yes. Legal, then
Sure.
DCM, and then
Yeah. And Councillor Bailao doesn't have one, but Perks does have them already.
Okay, and we now have quorum, so we're going to resume our meeting. Hope everybody had a good lunch, and we'll start with questions of staff. And to remind everybody, we're on item 13.3, official plan review, transportation, recommended official plan amendment. Councillor Perks, I believe you have questions of staff?
Thank you. My first question, this is sort of a belts and suspenders thing. In some places in the OP in front of us, OP amendment in front of us, it refers to vehicle sharing, and in other places it refers to vehicles for hire. I just want to make sure that you feel it's sufficiently clear that vehicle sharing doesn't mean Uber, but rather it means a service where an individual picks the vehicle up and uses it themselves.
So through the chair, the references in the policy to vehicle for hire are only made in the same way that we refer to such things as taxis.
Yes.
And it is only in respect of the way that that activity impacts on-site physical design and pick-up and drop-off activity and such. The other references in the policies refer to car sharing and ride sharing as distinct from vehicle for hire. Car sharing and ride sharing is a travel demand management technique, if you will, to economize the use of space and, employ in in our land use planning system in a way to, minimize the use of vehicles.
Okay.
So I feel in conclusion that they are distinct and their intent is distinct in the draft policies.
Thank you. That was my question.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Wong-Tam?
Yes, just picking up where Councillor Perks left off. If that is the case, then why change it? Wouldn't the word taxi just be sufficient? Like, you're not going to put up a sign that says vehicle for hire, or you can just put up a sign that says taxi stand.
Through the chair, it may just be current, we are contemporizing the wording of the official plan, and vehicle for hire is something that is being more commonly referred to and including in municipal bylaw, municipal code language. So we're trying to be consistent with other documents of the city.
Would we not be creating a little bit of confusion out there? Because I recognize that that's sort of city bylaw language, but the rest of the world doesn't speak in that language.
Well, we've
Are we now calling for vehicles for hire as opposed to I'm calling for a taxi?
Through the chair, I grant you that, you're probably using the term calling for a taxi or calling for an Uber or a Lyft, probably using commercial terms. But I think we've attempted to be very clear, and we're not implying, the intent is not to imply any or confer any inference on vehicle for hire in the wording that we've put forward in the document.
In the amendments to the OP, there are some areas where the words universally accessible is struck, or universally accessible. The first word, universally, is struck. And then there's other words that are accessible that are inserted, and then there's access. The word access is struck. What is the value proposition that's driving this? Because I'm not sure. What are you trying to achieve at the end of the day?
Through the chair, the official plan used terms like access, accessibility, or accessible in about 3 different ways. And the changes in language are intended to clarify which intent in each case, so that we're left with accessible, accessibility, and access only referring to the AODA sense of the word, and using other common language to refer to the more common sense of just someone being able to get to a place.
So whenever I see that word access, accessibility, it's all about AODA requirements. Is that correct?
That is the intent.
Okay. And then with respect to the climate emergency that we have just declared at the City of Toronto, what specifically are the changes in the OP around the transportation policy that actually respond to that? How have we responded to that?
So I'll begin by saying that overall we've introduced wording that prioritizes non-vehicular transportation and transit. So we've built in much the same way that we did with TO Core. We built in that policy direction as a leading way of approaching land use planning. There are other, I think, our consultations with the Transform TO and public consultations have, I would say, infused the entire approach with more of a climate lens. I'd have to, get back to you on specific areas where I could draw out for you more specifically where it references.
That would be very helpful. I would appreciate that. I guess I'm trying to understand that oftentimes when we use the word prioritize, you're suggesting to council that we prioritize perhaps active transportation, but what in reality happens is that we prioritize the motor vehicle, and that's what we're building the city towards. So given the fact that this is an opportunity to refresh this particular piece of the OP, then what specifically are we doing to ensure that the new world order under the climate emergency, that when we plan for transit and transportation, that we prioritize active transportation and climate positive transportation?
So I would just simply say that the way that we want to go forward with transportation overall is to develop all of those elements. I'll use complete streets as an example of how we would go about implementing that kind of a policy direction, but certainly developing key elements of the transportation system. When you look at a complete street lens, you are allocating road space in a way that's oriented more to moving people instead of automobiles, for example, as we did with King Street. We can see that in some of the work we're doing with Yonge Street and other more complete street or shared street models that we're developing through environmental assessments. So that's just one way where the policy would hit the ground, if you will, and we would choose to prioritize road space in a way that more effectively manages that space for moving people, creating place, and has that alignment with our climate goals, our CO2 reduction goals.
Let me just try to reframe it. I guess I'm trying to understand that given the way this transportation document, the transportation policy is now drafted, which is supposed to be looking ahead into the future, if we were to place this particular document before council and said, here's the scenario that we have, do we rebuild the Gardner elevated highway, or do we tear it down to achieve a different type of city building outcome? What would this transportation policy tell council? How would it inform that decision?
And that was your last question.
Well, it could very well tell council what our original advice was to council with respect to the Gardner, which was, as you know, a different path was chosen. But I think you'll continue to see as we implement or run to ground the climate emergency, that orientation and more strongly expressed through advice that city staff gives city council.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Madam Chair, so page 5 of the report talks about the purpose of the amendments, and I think that's well articulated. Lots of great language in here about cycling and bike share in 2.4. So that's really positive as well. I think that there's 2 areas that perhaps could be more robust around road safety and electric vehicles. So we do reference the 2016 Vision Zero plan, but not the 2.0 update, which obviously has a new focus of, or different articulated priorities in that, in the ways that we're doing that across the city. And then the second piece is we're talking about autonomous vehicles and kind of actually picking up on Councillor Wong Tam's remarks there with respect to the climate piece, though, we're not really talking about electric vehicles or how we're preparing for that here. So I know that the OP policies are to talk about our goals, but we also need to talk about the implementation side of it, and I want to understand how these policies will help us achieve those road safety improvements reflective of Council's new Vision Zero 2.0, as well as the electric vehicle piece in light of the work that we're doing on climate.
Through the chair, perhaps I'll start with the second piece. There are specific policies added in the section about transportation demand management to talk about requiring new developments to include charging stations and parking providers as well, to include charging stations for electric vehicles. So in different ways, looking at how we can expand the network for electric vehicles to be able to operate in the city. So that is in there. I mean, I think that safety more generally is one of the overall objectives of what we're trying to do. It weaves its way through a number of policies. I'll have to look back at the specific reference, Councillor.
With respect to specific naming references, one of the constant challenges with the official plan is keeping it contemporary with decisions, city council, and initiatives and strategies. So we have policy text, we have non-policy text, and we have sidebars, and we use all 3 to reflect and to try to keep the policy framework contemporary. I think if there are some, very up-to-date references that would be desirable to make to the language that don't affect the intent, and they're really just a last-minute clean up to make sure that it's absolutely contemporary, especially on the bike plan or other initiatives. We could look at that between now and council. If we had a motion to just do that final check to make sure that we're as up to date as we possibly can be. I don't believe that would require any new notice or anything like that. It's just a matter of making sure that it's 100% up to date.
Yeah, well, maybe that's something that we can move. I think it's attachment 3 where it talks about Vision Zero 2016, and that could be
Correct.
a simple update.
Right.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fletcher, you have questions of staff? No. Okay, great. I do have just a couple of questions. I'm looking at a motion from Councillor Perks, and it talks about the wording optimizing stop spacing. Can you explain a little bit exactly what you mean by that?
Through the chair, at the TTC, we have constantly carried out a program of optimizing stop spacing. However, generally, most of our stops have not been placed in a very consistent way or in a way that is backed by a strong policy framework. So we are changing that. We're doing better at that now. We're coming up with a way to decide on stop locations and to have clear standards as to where they go. And that's the sort of work we've been doing in the last couple of years to bring some rationality to our stop locations.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And speakers, Councillor Perks.
Thank you. So I have two motions. First, that we amend attachment 1, section 226 by deleting the word "and optimizing stop spacing." And 2, that we eliminate the paragraph on automated vehicles. Just to talk a little bit about each of those. The optimizing stop spacing, I've been through this process with the TTC. They came to me, I want to say 5 years ago, and said, there are too many stops for the Queen Street car as it travels through your ward. We would like to eliminate a number of them. And I asked, why would you want to do that? And they said, to improve the speed and travel times of vehicles so that we can reduce the number of vehicles that we have to run on that route to carry the same number of passengers so that we can reduce operating costs. In other words, to save money, let's make people walk further to transit stops. Now, that's not always the intention. In some instances, it is worthwhile to look at rationalizing it, and that should be a conversation that we have in an open and frank manner. I just think we shouldn't build into the official plan the assumption that this process of eliminating TTC stops, which is the only experience I've had of the optimizing process at the TTC, should be built into our official plan. We don't need to have it there in order for the TTC to be in a position to reconsider the location of our transit stops. So let's just take it out, and if the TTC wants to review their stops, they still have a mechanism to do it. I'm not saying they're not allowed to. I'm just saying let's not build that into our official plan. As to the second one, I know there's wide and differing opinions on the future of automated vehicles. I do know that nobody in the world is anywhere close to being able to bring them to market. The AI work to get a vehicle to recognize what is and isn't a person has been shown to be completely inadequate. I have yet to figure out how the moral dilemmas that drivers have to face are going to be dealt with. And finally, making cars work better is not a good climate goal. Everything else in the plan we have here is about privileging sustainable modes of transportation. There may come a day, I don't personally believe that it's going to come, when George Jetson gets his jetpack and all the cars are self-driving. That day is not today. When they have proven that that day is near us, we can come back and review our official plan policies at that point. A final note, I'm not moving a motion on it because in conversation with the clerk, it is mind-numbingly difficult to figure out how to do. But I wish we could take the Scarborough subway out of these official plan amendments. I'm going to be holding my nose when I vote on the overall OP changes here.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers? Councillor Bradford?
Well, I have a motion, I think, going to clerks. I don't know if you've received it yet. It may not be there because it was just based on the conversation we just said, but to do prior to the motion will say prior to the council meeting that we do one final review to make sure that the policies referenced are the latest city policies. I don't know if you need a motion to do that, but yeah.
Take a minute. Rather get it right.
Don't want to say anything, Paulo?
About the,
okay.
not putting that in the official plan about the spacing, because then you'll wake up and find there's no stops.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you. Just to help run the clock a little bit. I want to thank staff for doing this body of work. I think I'm a little bit, I'm reserved by the recommendations before us, as I'm actually not clear on how does this transportation policy update to the OP actually speaks to and addresses the climate emergency, when we know that greenhouse gas emissions are produced in cities in big quantums, but also through transportation in particular. So I actually I'm challenging that perhaps it doesn't do what I think it could do, especially if we're heading into this next phase of urban life. The issue around automated vehicles, I actually entirely agree with what Councillor Perks had to say, but I also think that this report says almost next to nothing about autonomous vehicles, and I think you put a little placeholder, to be continued, and there's probably two schools of thought as how far ahead do you jump in front of it when we do know it's coming down the pipeline, perhaps not necessarily tomorrow, but we know that it is, and at the same time, should it not be in the city's best interest to also define before the industry, the automotive industry, defines for us what they think autonomous vehicles can do for us in cities. I actually think it's better for us to define in our transportation policies what we want this new technology to do and how we want it to behave and who we want it to serve by laying out how we want to build out the transportation network. I want to thank staff because I know that this is never an easy discussion, and I also want to note that by way of prioritizing, creating priority-oriented streets, whether it's pedestrian priority or cycling priority, or in most cases, every street, as far as I can tell, is passenger vehicle, private passenger vehicle prioritized. I'm actually wondering if we were actually a little bit too loose on the language, because what we want is to be aspirational with our OP, but at the same time, if our OP is aspirational without real strong drivers to the outcome that we're hoping to achieve, left to the whims of elected officials, we could make some bad decisions. Just as noted that the chief planner at that particular point in time stood up and said that rebuilding the elevated expressway is not the way to go for 21st century cities. And that was clear planning advice, and we probably should have stuck to it because right now we're having all sorts of headaches. But I wonder if there's a way for this particular transportation policy to actually be stronger, more forceful in identifying the fact that when you're building complete streets, it's not just a wish list in terms of city building, but it is an absolute requirement. That it is an absolute requirement to have sidewalks where people are expected to walk safely. It is an absolute requirement of city building and all the infrastructure that has to go into building the city, that it is not optional. Because right now, by saying prioritizing certain types of users on the roadway, it's still optional for us. And the default priority right now, until it's changed by way of a solid document such as this to stipulate that it's not optional, It's not left for judgment. It's not left for council, but it is the way forward to the future. Then we will build a city around people, movement, whether they're traveling on foot or if they're traveling on bicycle. And I really would like us to get there. I recognize we're not there today, but the next time the OP is just like 2025, when this thing is cracked open again, or will we then be courageous enough to then take that step forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Appreciate Councillor Wong-Tam helping me get forward with this motion. So we have that drafted, and it's just to have our chief planner come back to council with any references to the latest city policies and reflect those changes in the report. I would like to thank staff for their hard work on this. Updating the OP is actually, that's work that never stops, despite like the 5-year review. That work is always underway, and it's a huge task in a city like Toronto, and it's been compounded and further complicated by changes with the provincial government and some of the policy directions that continue to evolve and change as we move forward. So I think anytime you touch the transit file in this city or in the province of Ontario, as it were, it can be challenging, it can be difficult. We should have a discussion as a city about whether or not we have enough of a comprehensive transit plan, which is part of the discussion that's taken place today, and we heard that from deputants. I heard the comments in the deputations about the need for that comprehensive approach, and I think actually, truthfully, a lot of the language here is moving us further in that direction, particularly when we talk about priorities. And it's also important to recognize that this work doesn't take place in a silo at planning and housing. It also takes place across different divisions. So, when we talk about Transform TO, Energy and Environment, when we talk about the TTC Commission, our 5-year service plan, like this work is taking place in different places. But this is obviously the visionary document that sort of pulls it all together. I noted that the consultants in their engagement report quoted a public comment that said, "Map 4 sucks." I thought that was a little harsh, personally. But at the same time, I think that we can't disperse. Yeah. Well, no, I don't know if that was a planner's comments, but in any case, I think that we can't dismiss that sort of feedback, and that it is concerns that the public is bringing to us. So we have good reasons for that, and Bill 107 and the upload has certainly kind of thrown us into chaos around transportation planning. But the decisions that we have to make here at Planning and Housing and at City Council are really about identifying our priorities for expansion. And I know that, with serving on TTC, that we do have a 5-year service plan. We're taking steps to put bus priority routes on some of our most heavily used corridors. We're rolling out enhanced streetcar service, and there's a lot more. The cycling network plan, as we updated that and move forward on a number of big projects right now, that's really important. So to Councillor Wong-Tam's points about, we have prioritized single occupancy vehicles on our roads in this city. That's how we've grown and evolved for decades and decades, and that's starting to change, and this plan and language gives signal to that. With respect to Councillor Perk's views on private automobiles, whether they're electric or not, I think that there is room for nuance in that discussion, and I think that the reality is people will be driving cars in the City of Toronto, and given the emission gains that come from combustion engine vehicles, we should be trying to address that in a pragmatic way. I don't think it's just say that that's not going to happen or that we don't want it to happen. We should actually take concrete steps to lessen the impacts, and I think EVs are going to allow us to do that. But overall, want to thank staff for their work on this, and I'm happy to see it move forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I do have a motion as well to move the recommendations.
Oh, sorry, point of personal privilege. Councillor Perks told me that he was referencing automated vehicles, not electric vehicles. Yeah. Right, so,
Sure. Okay.
Automated vehicles.
Clarified. So I'm moving the recommendations in the supplementary report. And I'd like to thank staff for their work and also thank everybody for their deputations and the different residents associations. I think that we heard loud and clear that we need to pay close attention to what's happening in Long Branch and on Lakeshore and continue the conversations with the groups. But this is a plan that it is involving, and we do understand that the conversation needs to continue. And that is why, because the plan is involving, even though that we're supposed to be until 2025, the next time that we review this, I think it is important to take into consideration some of the new and emerging technologies that we're having, and that's why I will not be supporting part 2 of Councillor Perk's motion. The reason is I do believe that when the city is actually delineated an automated vehicle strategy and is having its own pilot, the TTC has its own pilot for an automated bus by the zoo, I think it is important that we acknowledge the results of those pilots and just include it as part of the strategy and not be surprised and try to close our eyes and saying these things are not here. I think they will bring challenges, they will bring opportunities, and we have to deal with these things head on and not try to put it under the rug. And so those are my comments on that. Again, thank you to staff for a lot of the work that was done here. This is important work for how we integrate our different modes of transportation. It was very good to hear some compliments from residents in here that we're moving into finally directions like, school traveling and cycling infrastructure and bringing all these different modes of transportation together in a strategy to properly plan our city and properly plan how the people and the residents of the city move around in the very different modes that we have available for them. So thank you, staff, and thank you for everybody that participated. Okay. And so that said, first motion to vote. Part 1 of Councillor Perk's motions. All those in favor? That carries. Part 2 of Councillor Perk's motion. All those in favor? And all those against? And that carries. And Councillor Bradford's motion. All those in favor? That carries. And the recommendations. All those in favor? That carries. Adam as amended. All those in favor? That carries. I want to note that I am holding my oath. Do you want me to record this vote? Okay, let's move to item 13.4, Fir Grove Grassways Revitalization Initial Development Proposal.
Great, Madam Chair, before we do,
Want to release something?
I can release 7, which is the inclusionary zoning and affordable housing opportunities response to committee direction.
Okay, can we have a motion to, you're moving to receive the report. All those in favor? That carries. Okay. First speaker, Barry Reader? That's right. Okay, Barry.
I was going to show a video, but it's not popping up now. So if it does near the end, I'll do that. So my name is Barry Reader. I'm a community minister with the United Church of Canada. And I've had the privilege of working in the Fir Grove community in a community development role for the last 25 years. On the one hand, I must say it's been a privilege to work in such a vibrant, caring community, such as Fir Grove. On the other hand, for those living there, right now, it's been pure hell. Initially, $27 million was promised to the community to fix up the interior and exterior of the Grassway units. When architectural designs were sent to engineers, they said, you can't fix these units. They're rotted out from the core. So half of the units were deemed inhabitable for humans to live in, and through a flawed relocation plan in a 4-month period, those residents were quickly forced to move. That was almost 3 years ago. The remaining half of the tenants are still there. Although the units were built the same time and suffered from leaking roofs, the remaining units are covered with blue siding, hiding the rot. The residents remaining have been dutiful in working with Toronto Community Housing in coming up with a site plan of a redeveloped community which will be safer and fitting. Meanwhile, for the last 2.5 years, they've been in a holding pen, waiting in rodent-infested, moldy units beside units which have been boarded up and fenced off as a haven for rats and mice. At a community meeting last week, an exasperated tenant said that in 1 month period, she caught 19 mice in her unit. Other tenants have come to me explaining that they're trying to move because of the mold and their kids are experiencing respiratory problems, but can't because they're not seen as a priority transfer. I'm sure you've all heard the planning story about broken windows, and if you don't fix them, more will happen. Well, living in a depressed situation like Firgrove, beside boarded up units, is attracting other problems. In the month of December, there were 4 people shot. Enough is enough. I deplore you today to move with haste in approving this application, as well as expediting the process so that the remaining tenants can move out of these depressing, rodent-filled, moldy units. Give the time so that they can be moved appropriately to decent and safe accommodation while the finishing touches are done to the site plan. I also deplore you to advocate with utmost urgency and fervor to other levels of government to join with you in funding this venture, and that if no external funds come forward, that you as a city council foot the bill. The good people of Firgrove deserve to be given the dignity and respect that they deserve. For any naysayers in this city or other levels of government, I would challenge them to come to the community and spend 1 night in Firgrove. I'm sure that they wouldn't live there, and neither should the remaining tenants in Firgrove. I ask you to move with haste and do the right thing. The lives of the good people in Firgrove depend on it. The video is not coming up, but it was showing as far as the kind of the dilapidated siding of the buildings. And since then, they were put up boards and fenced around and stuff like that. So, but come to the community and see if you don't believe me. Unfortunately, Shannon Holness was going to be the next deputant. Shannon grew up in the community. She has a Master's of Urban Planning, was part of the Grower Grassways, and quite well elegant and spoken, but she's going to send her deputation in. So I ask people to take the time to end up read that. And one last comment, I just wanted to give a shout out to Marcia from Acorn in raising the awareness around affordable housing. It really is an issue, and these issues are connected.
Thank you so much. Any questions?
I just wonder, why is that video not loading? Is it just a technical problem that you've got?
Yeah, it's just, I think my battery's kind of low dying and stuff like that, so.
Oh, is that? Right, okay.
Yeah.
It'd be helpful to see that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can get it going and then maybe slip
Maybe
it in
you
if
could
that's
speak to
possible.
IT over here.
Okay, and it was just a short clip of another video, so.
It's fine, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Next speaker, Alejandro Ruiz Vargas.
Thank you. So again, thank you for the opportunity. FairPro has been very dear or heart. I mean, Acorn heart. I don't know, you remember we were fighting before the revitalization and many of the houses being torn down. And we asked, and the mayor was here, sit down in the chair of Councilor Ana Bailao, and he said that he went and asked to the province for money, and the province at that time said no. So then when he finally got the money, the housing and fair growth was really in social disrepair that wasn't able to repair it, so they need to do the revitalization. So we had some concerns because revitalization sounds good, but revitalization does a lot of damage to people because take them from the roots. You remember Edna Rose? Now she's living in the community. She's still being the cross guard, but she locally found some place. But what about the other people that has to be removed and moved to another neighborhood? And probably people like Edna Rose that was 30 years living there. So I know revitalization at this point was needed because you didn't have the money or the city didn't have the money. But the good news is you have the money now for the 10 years, isn't it? This is what we understood. 140 million are going to you, TCAC, every year. And it was money coming from the government, federal government, and the provincial government. So I hope so is no more revitalization. So we hope so is no more revitalizations because, on the other hand, too, is I as a member of ACRE, calling the staff, the persons who do the how you call that, the negotiations, that remember that when you negotiate, there are people out there, 55% of rent, or Torontonians, we are renters. Remember, there are people that live in 3 bedrooms, 3 families. Remember, there are people who live 6 people in a room and 6 different beds. Remember, there are people who are still in the shelters. Remember, there are people in the ravines. Remember, there are people under the bridges. When you're going to negotiate, please remember these people. Or if you need help for the negotiation, please look for another options. But we cannot continue like that. We cannot continue giving land to a developer and then only receiving 1,000 units and the developer making 4,000 units, like what is happening in Lawrence, that's going to happen in Lawrence Heights. So I know this is fair growth, but this has been something that has been happening. Is actually very depressing to see that we had an opportunity to change the life of many people, and we only go and do a bad deal. So to finish, again, rent control. Any market rental unit that has been built in our lands should have rent control. And the other thing is members. ACON members have won this fight in other cities like Burnaby, as you know, and BC. And the city changed all the policies to stop demolitions and stop renovations. So now that we have the money, please, we don't want to see more revitalizations. We don't need revitalizations if we have the money to do the repairs. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thanks, Alejandra. Next, Marcia Stone.
If I could beg you for a second.
You have your video?
See the video.
Yep.
And it'll only take, I'm only showing it less than a minute, so.
Paula?
I'm sorry. Yes.
That's the video.
Video. Okay.
I don't know if we can zoom in on it or not, but. Oh, yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Marcia?
Good afternoon, councillors. It's me again. My name is Marcia Stone. I'm a member of the Western Chapter of ACORN. ACORN is the Association of Community Organization for Reform Now. We're a membership group of low and moderate income people fighting for change. Many of our members are tenants, and many of our members are on the wait list for TCHC housing. I am one of those 67,000 people, they tell me, that's on a wait list. I am on this waiting list, and I think I'll probably be dead before I have a chance to get an apartment in there. It's sad. It really is sad, because that would be something I would be able to afford. It's rent geared to income. I'm here to bring a few concerns from our members to you about revitalization and about TCHC. First of all, we definitely need TCHC to be safe and healthy and in good repair. Revitalization is good, don't get me wrong. But with the wait list so long, we need to make sure we are adding as many units as possible. The amount of affordable units built in this revitalization is small in comparison to the number of non-affordable units. We need more affordable units, not more condos. It should be 50-50 affordable units, half and half. That's a good mix. And the units also to be of the same quality as the others. We are also wondering, what's the level of affordability in this development? There's a big difference between 100% of average market rent and 30% of income. What's the level? ACORN members know that actual affordability is based on income, not market rent. Another point we are concerned about, these developments right now are not going to have any rent control because Doug Ford got rid of it. The market rental units are at risk of massive rent increases. How can you be building a TCHC and calling it affordable, but having units without rent control? That's ridiculous. So there's a real need for you guys to require rent control on any of these developments on public land or getting public funds. Personally, I hope one day that I do get an affordable unit and off the wait list. But I also need to live in a safe space. My adult children need to know that their mother is living safe. So making sure the place is well built, well designed, that's very important too. We want to make sure that affordable units are not substandard. All units should be the same. One final concern, we don't want these revitalizations to gentrify the neighborhood. We need to make sure there's a good mix of affordable levels. This is why it's so important that there's real affordability, real rent control, and as many affordable units as possible. You're talking about the future here. This is a major opportunity, and I hope you take the opportunity to hold these developers and contractors accountable. And as of right now, I've decided to take my name off of that housing list in TCHC, as I would prefer to be in a safe environment. And as I can see on my street, Weston Road, there are a few TCHC buildings, but they're not safe. A lot of seniors live in the building and they complain and they're concerned. They don't like to leave their place because they're scared. And this is the opportunity for us to have an inclusive, safe living environment for all Ontarians. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Any questions? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. Bob Murphy?
My name is Bob Murphy. I'm a member of ACORN York Southwestern. Many of our members are low and moderate income and on the existing Toronto Housing Never Never list. Boy, what a mountain to climb. What a mountain. I am personally on the waiting, sleeping and dormant housing list. I am also an Ontario Disability recipient. I'm here to talk about the Toronto Community Housing revitalization at Fairgrove, because Toronto Community Housing and affordable housing is extremely important to our communities. My main concern, there needs to be more rent geared to income units so we can start chopping down the waiting list. How many of the affordable units at Fairgrove are rent geared to income? I see 270 or so are going to be Toronto Community Housing. What about the 107 affordable for whom units? Who are they affordable for? What will the rent be on these units? We need to make sure that a percentage of affordable is actually affordable, based on income, not market rent. Many individuals on ODSP are paying 70 to 80% of their assistance on rent. The number one priority for an ODSP recipient, number one is rent. Number two is cell phone access. Number three is transportation. Number four is internet access. And number five, if you're an Ontario disability recipient, while you're in the lineup at that food bank, number five on the priority list of Ontario disability recipient, in my eyes or my experience, number five is food. Number five is food. Number five is food. So we need real deep affordability, and we need more affordable units in Toronto community housing projects. Thank you, and I'm happy to address any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. Jennifer, a favorite? Nope, Jennifer's not here. Oh, there she is. Thanks for joining us today, Jennifer. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Jennifer Favorite. I'm a member of Toronto ACORN. ACORN is an organization made up of low and moderate income people fighting for justice with 130,000 members across 9 cities. We are here today because affordable housing is a huge issue in the city. I'm here to talk about the reinvigoration of Forgrove. I used to live in Metro Housing in Forgrove from 1979 with my children. I moved because my eldest daughter, she's moved out, and I asked for relocation on Grand Ravine Drive with 300 Grand Ravine, where I live with my 2 other kids until they become of age, and then I moved out. And now it's very important to me because now I live on Driftwood Avenue. I moved to Driftwood Avenue. It's very important to me because I'm also soon to become a senior, and I know seniors need respect and dignity and rely on affordable place to live. This is clearly needed for affordable housing for seniors. My friend Edna was forced to move out of the building on Forgrove here, and many seniors struggle to find affordable housing. For the THC developers need to be held accountable. The waiting list is too long. Why is that? We need not only replace affordable housing, but build more. At least 50% of the development should be affordable. We need affordable housing for low and middle income people. This redevelopment need to have housing for seniors, and we need a fair system of redevelopment on public land. ACORN demand deep affordability, high quality buildings with high level of workmanship. We need to make sure that the tenants' relocate plan is fair. People should be getting this place from the neighborhood, and they should have first choice of the new unit which they are rebuilt. These units need to be affordable. ACORN demands real affordability based on income. Affordability is affordability. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Ms. Jennifer Favorite.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. Alejandro Gonzalez Redon.
Alejandro had to leave.
Alejandro? You had to leave?
He had to leave.
You had to leave, yeah. Okay, so that is the list of our speakers on this item. Any questions of staff? Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, I have a question about the remaining units, and I've just done that work with you. There's 236 units that are going to be demolished if this is approved, correct?
Correct.
And currently, according to this, 144 of them are simply closed. They're uninhabitable. Nobody will be moving in there. They're shut down until the end of the road here.
Correct.
So that leaves 92 units that people are inhabiting, probably not in the best conditions. And if this passes, gets to City Council and it's okayed, then is there an opportunity to begin the relocation earlier than waiting for all of the zoning, everything, all of those types of approvals?
Through the chair, the report in front of you today recommends that we can immediately demolish the units that we vacated in 2016, 2017, and then the remaining units can be vacated as soon as the planning approvals are in place.
Which would be?
End of the year.
So I guess I'm asking, and I'm probably going to move that we work to expedite that with relocating those tenants as soon as possible, because I understand you're holding units for them now based on the probability that this will be approved in some way.
We've collected about 30 units so far, but we put a hold on them. We put a hold on collecting any further units to facilitate relocation until we got some certainty from council that we were going to move forward.
So if this is approved in the February council, you're pretty certain that we're moving forward on that?
Correct.
Yes. And there have been a number of speakers that have suggested that the number of affordable units could be increased. Without putting a number there today, are you comfortable with us sending this for approval, but asking you to revisit that, to look at the mix or any opportunities to increase the affordable units on that space?
Yes, we've been working really closely with City Planning, the Housing Secretariat, and Creatio on this, and we're happy to discuss this further.
And then the last is that people are suggesting there could be more RGI units there. The city's policy and the requirement official plan policy is all of the existing RGIs have to be replaced. And that would be, at the end of the day, 388 rent geared to income new RGI.
236 are proposed to be demolished, so those are the ones that we will replace. The existing units on site today are going to be refurbished, and so there will be no change in their tenancies.
So still there'd be 388. Is it possible to just add RGI, or is that kind of a finite number through the system where we can't just start adding? Does somebody want to answer that? Can we just add RGIs, or is that a number that's given to us or that's determined in a certain way that is pretty hard? There's a hard stop on the number that we have.
So TCHC has an overall service level set by the province. How they distribute that across their portfolio is flexible.
So that's set by the province?
Yes.
It's not set by the city or this committee?
It is not set by the city or this committee.
Because the subsidy's coming provincially?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's clear. And what was the program earlier? Maybe you could tell me what that program was. That there was a program TCHC had hoped to redo Fir Grove. Was it called Reset? What was the name of it?
Yes, that's correct. There was a plan where TCHC was going to invest in the capital repair of the existing stock and potentially infill build in certain communities.
And that plan is deemed not possible. The nature of the buildings and the conditions of the buildings is such you cannot.
I can't speak for all the projects within the Reset program, but for Fir Grove specifically, it was determined that the housing wasn't in a condition that investing in it further didn't make any sense because of the condition of the existing units, and so we decided that the best way to move forward is a complete revitalization of this community.
Is there some way, I guess I would just ask, is there some way that we could look and see how many are in the Reset and how many are getting capital repairs and how many might find itself in the same situation now as the Fir Grove properties? Is that something that you'd be prepared to let this committee know?
Yep, we can take it back and we can report back to this committee.
I'll ask for that formally. Thank you very much.
Any other questions of staff? I think Councillor Fletcher asked all my questions, so I'm good. No, that's great. So, sorry, we can't, no, there's no questions. Thanks. Speakers. Speakers? Councillor Fletcher.
I do want to speak. I do have a motion asking that City Council request the Deputy City Manager, Community and Social Services to work directly with Toronto Community Housing Corporation to facilitate the relocation of the Fir Grove tenants living in the remaining 92 apartments. And I'm simply saying this because we recognize that this has been a long journey for those tenants. They were part of a reset program that couldn't proceed because of the condition of the buildings. So numbers have basically moved out or had to move out over time because of the condition of the building. Since this report, I understand there's another 10 units have been closed and leaving only 92 tenants rather than the 102 in the report. And I just think that we should be clear in our intention, since this has had a long trajectory at Fir Grove, that whatever needs to happen once this clears City Council, to quickly move the remaining 92 into better housing conditions would be a good thing to do. And then the whole site would be available. All 236 units would be available for demolition. That's the first thing. I understand you, Madam Chair, are going to bring a motion to look at the mix, if it's possible, to increase the mix of affordable rental on that site in whatever way possible. And I don't know when you would ask for that report to come back, but it would be helpful if we knew a little bit more about that before the final report came. And lastly, I didn't have a chance to write this up, but I'm very interested in the reset. And if there are other properties that TCHC knows about that find themselves in the same situation, where originally it was thought it'd be possible to actually refurbish them, but the conditions of those are such that that's going to be impossible. So that would be helpful if we had that knowledge and that we could have a plan around those, including knowing how well the reset program is going, because the units that were part of that reset really needed a lot of work. So I might just ask if I can move that. I'll move that at City Council, but I'm letting Mr. Tong know my intention that I'll be doing there. And I might ask that one again at City Council, so you're ready to answer. Thank you very much for your work. I just want to thank all the tenants and everybody who've been involved in this so far. Keep staying involved. Let's get a great project. As soon as we deal with people that are living in conditions that aren't great and we can get them to a new place, you only get to build something once. You don't go back in again. So we're going to build it once. Let's get it right and build it once. So that's why I think we're asking for some of these things. And I noticed that you're nodding your head to that, so thank you.
Any other speakers? No? I have, but that's for this item as well. Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to have to stand down the So, no, actually, we have a solution. We actually have somebody that would like to speak that was not registered, and it actually fits in because we need some extra time to prepare a motion. So I'm going to ask the resident, and I don't know his name. Do you have his name? Okay. Can I get your attention, please? Okay. Can I have the resident to come forward and to speak on this item? So we're going to alter the way we've passed this time. You usually need to register before, but we're going to... Okay, so you'll have 5 minutes.
We are the tenants still living in Fir Grove. I also am here to speak on behalf of myself and the tenants still living here. You have the power to hear us today and make a change, a real difference in the lives of human beings. People of color, minority children who cannot speak for themselves, who did not ask for the cards they were dealt, but to do it every day with grace and dignity. We tell people we live in one of the best countries in the world. One of the best countries in the world. We hold our heads high because we are proud to be Canadians. But unfortunately, there are two worlds. There's our world and there's your world, I would say. And coming from my world and where I live, it's a lot more difficult to get where you want to be. You go through struggles, you go through temptations, you go through a whole bunch of stuff. Even while I was living there, I'm still living there actually, and right now I'm gonna tell you guys, health-wise, it's killing everybody. It's diminishing everybody's health. My floors, I would walk on my floors and water will be rising up from my floors. I'm going to my bed and water is leaking from my lights. Literally, it got to the point that the light could not even turn on anymore because of water damage. What is being done? Nothing. All these problems that are in the community, nothing is being done about anything. And I feel like you guys have to step up personally. I don't see what you guys are doing. I don't see anything personally. I was working for Toronto Community Housing for a little bit, and the whole process was just, it's long. What for? People need answers. People need solutions, not just, oh, let's just talk about it. Let's debate about it. I understand things need to be debated and things need to be settled and put into stone, but how long? Like, for real, like sometimes I can't even sleep because the air is so bad in my apartment. So with that being said, I rest my case.
Are you finished?
I'm finished.
Okay. Councillor Fletcher, you have questions?
My name is Simba. I'm live for Free Grove, the same building, for 7 years now. And I'm telling you, the situation is very bad than you can believe. Earlier, before me, the guy said many things. But I have to tell you, you cannot live there.
So sorry to cut you off.
For 1 day.
Asbestos. You guys know what asbestos is?
And you have to wait until when? We ask, please, move out. Simple.
I'm so
How
sorry.
many times we have to say that?
Can I add on to that? What you just said? Yes, even with the relocation. My whole experience because I was on the other side where I was relocated, and they were trying to relocate my family from where I am right now over just up the street to Driftwood. And I know you guys are not, you're not in my world, but you wouldn't know that, like, there's certain places that, like, oh, if you live here and like just because you live there, you're automatically affiliated. Okay, so if you try to relocate someone from one place to another place, you're setting them up to die, literally, because it's just like, the people you're gonna move them in there, and then guess what? They're gonna be like, oh, you're gonna come outside one day, they're gonna be like, oh, where are you from? And then you're like, oh, I used to live here, and then guess what? Dead.
Okay. So deputation is done. I think Councillor Fletcher has a question for you. So
I finished. Thank you very much.
They're done.
So what I'm hearing is that, did you say you were relocated already?
Yes, I was. I moved from one side to the other side because they were trying to relocate me into.
Oh, you moved from one side of Fir Grove to the other side of?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they were trying to relocate me to.
Driftwood.
Yes, exactly. And I was just like, yeah, I'm.
Got it.
I'm not
Yeah.
going there.
So there's some of the relocation finesses that need to be taken into account, depending
Yes.
upon who's moving. Is there kind of a rivalry, Driftwood and Fir Grove, long-standing?
No, there's rivalry all over the city.
Okay.
All over the city. It's not just between there and there. Because to be honest, the rivalry is it's gang related. Literally, it's really so big, and so sometimes it's far beyond my comprehension, because it's just like I've been trying to keep out of it for the past how long, and it's like things always find a way to find you because it's.
So I guess what I'm going to say is that your relocation, the relocation for yourself, for someone else, to be very sensitive as to what community you would move into.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? There's a layer there that's important to take into account for the relocation, for your health, for your safety, for your well-being, for your life. Yes, I got that. And that you wanted
For myself,
Pardon?
my neighbors, for myself, for my neighbors, you have to know that the building is in the bad condition right now.
Yes, and we know this will allow the relocations to take place.
Please.
So just formally, so my motion here today, did you hear my motion before you got up to speak? Are you aware this will go to City Council on February 27th?
Yeah.
For approval by everybody?
Yeah.
Once it's approved, you might know that then there can be very serious and urgent relocation. And that's
Urgent.
my motion, as asked our deputy city manager to work on that, but I spoke already. I do think that hearing what's been said today, we need to add the layer on of being careful where you're going. So when you get relocated or you get offered, you're out a draw, right? Goes through a draw, yeah? The draw's already, no, that's for the new apartments. Your relocation, can you turn anything down, or are you penalized for a turn down?
I'm not too sure. Oh, well, you.
Three times, and then you get, that's it.
Yeah.
Three choices.
3 choices, and that's about it. Did they
So
tell you?
when we- Yeah, 3 choices, and if you turn them down, then you're you move to the bottom of the list at that point, yes? 1 choice, only once. Okay, so we're going to sort that out. I need to have more clarity, but we already asked questions, maybe at council, to make sure that in these situations that have been long-standing, that we're very sensitive to some of these issues that you've raised today, and try to build that into the process, although it's not normally part of the process.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today. Okay, are my motions ready? Yes. Okay, so 2 motions that I have. One is to ensure that our city staff work to explore all opportunities available to increase the number of affordable housing. So we're going to have the business plan and the zoning coming back here towards the end of the year. And through this process, I'm hoping that staff is going to look at all opportunities to add affordable housing on site as we're going through the process. This has been taking a significant amount of time, and I think that everybody is well aware of the urgency that we need right now. This is a process that started, as it was mentioned, with a reset program, and when investigation was started to happen, staff advised everybody, all of us, that really the buildings should not be just repatched or renovated. They should be torn down, and we should be looking at a revitalization. I think this is time that we move quick. I think this is an important revitalization that we need to invest all the funds, all the energy to get it done as soon as possible. And I think everybody's on the same page. So I think the message that we should be delivering, I think that all of us are delivering to the community members, is that we're all extremely supportive of this revitalization, that we've heard you, that there's some sensibilities and sensitivities that we need to be aware and we need to be careful as we're developing this program, but that we're very committed to working with the community to get it done as soon as possible. I think that's the message that we would like the community members to take back to everybody. I know that the local councillor could not be here today, but he has spoken to several members of the committee and expressed his support and expressed his commitment as well to work with the community to get it done and to be a strong advocate here at council for this program as well. So given that, I'm looking forward to getting this report, getting everybody committed, possibly with more affordable housing units, the replacement of our RGI, a great community facility as well that is part of this program, and to have a really strong community being able to be very proud of the work that we're all going to be doing together. My second motion that I have as well is to ensure that TCHC is not going to be charged for the site plan application fees and all that they have to pay. I think it's on, whoops. Question of the mover. Oh, okay. Yeah. And then that's it. I'm finished. Go ahead, Councillor Perks.
Okay. So if we defer the payment of all planning applications, put it back. Can I have the other one up? Of all planning application fees, where does that money come from?
Councillor.
Like, does Greg have to just have less money for paying staff? Or?
Yep.
So we have fewer planning resources as a result of this motion? Okay.
Not necessarily. If I am confident that sooner or later Greg's going to come up to us and say, I'm going to need an increase in my budget because I'm going to need to have more staff, and then we'll have to make that decision. All we're saying.
You have a whole different sense of how the budget process works than I do.
So all we're doing is like any other affordable housing applications for a nonprofit. We're not charging the nonprofit portion of this application the fees. Councillor Wong Tam?
But rather, I think your motion is just saying to defer the planning application fees and any type of ancillary fees until the site plan is submitted. So it's not that we're foregoing revenues, we're collecting it later, is that not correct?
Yeah, because there is going to be a private partner as well that is going to be part of the application, and so we don't want to defer all that. We need to make sure that that comes back. No, we don't.
The chair's saying she's not waiving the fees, so it's really to defer until perhaps when the site plan comes in.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, that's helpful. And then with respect to this particular motion, are we defining affordable units? Is it mid-range affordability? Is it deeply affordable? Is it home ownership? Is it rentals? Is it supportive housing? Is it RGI housing? Can you elaborate?
So,
and should we elaborate? And can we elaborate on the motion?
I ask that we don't, just because, so there, as you know, in the confidential report, they have a high-level proposal. And what we're asking is that as they're developing their performance better, as they get a partner, as they get in their planning, and they fine-tune the density that they get, they will know how much more they can push, and I think that is important for them to have some flexibility on that. They know very much that we like to have between 40% AMR to 80% AMR. That's usually what we get, and I will leave that to them in terms of the numbers of units and what they're coming to propose.
I guess the only one of the challenges I have with that is that on purple paper is simply 3 pages, and it's not really a business plan.
It's not that what will be coming back will be a business plan, and that will be giving us more, and them, more detail and the opportunity to go deeper. And that's why I'm asking them, as they are developing their business plan, please look at the opportunities to increase the number of your affordable units. You're going to be doing two things, business plan and the rezoning application.
Then are you saying that to staff, that you wanted them to come back with a wide range? So scenario one, we want to see X number of units for supportive housing, or X number of units allocated for 40% AMR, X number of, I guess you could come back with a business plan that touches like 10 different forms of affordable housing, but what's the direction? Are you expecting staff to actually run the performance on all 10 of them?
No, I'm expecting through the Housing Secretariat, through the TCHC and planning, that they look at the neighborhoods, they look at the incomes, they look at the needs, and they actually look at the performance that they have. And if they tell me that instead of having another extra 50 at 80%, that really what that community could use is 25 units at 40%, you know, if they believe that, you know, in that community was really important to need because we need more of a mix, I believe that's important. Right now, I don't know what range we're dealing with, and so we're not going to have. Keep in mind that we are replacing 288 RGI, and this is a market that is very untested for decades. Nothing has, I spoke with a local councillor. There's one condominium across the street that is now being, that is up for sale. Nothing has been built in this neighborhood for decades. We don't really know what the market is in this area. So I would like to have our staff being able to look a little bit of it and coming back to us, understanding that we need to build a community center, we need to replace the RGI, and we need to build affordable housing units. So I would like to give them a little bit of flexibility, given the circumstances to come back, you know, and not just put them in saying that they have to have all at 40% or all at 80%, or, you know, I'd like to give them some flexibility to use some data and some local context.
Then I guess to unpack and maybe to simplify, are you expecting staff to come back with affordable home ownership options?
No.
And can we stipulate that it's a number of affordable rental units to increase the number of affordable
Sure,
rental
I think they probably would know, but I think it's clearer. Yeah, I don't think anybody. That's not the way that we're going. So I would feel comfortable having a friendly amendment in saying a number of affordable rental units on the site.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, any more questions? No? Okay. Can we move it as a package? Yes? Okay. All those in favor? With Councillor Fletcher's motion and my motions as a package?
I want to vote against one.
Okay. So let's put the... Okay, Councillor Fletcher? Councillor Fletcher's motion, we have to vote on them separately. All those in favor, that carries. So this, it will read affordable rental units. So I amended this, so. And all those in favor, that carries. Okay, motion 3. The defer of the development charges. All those in favor? All those against? Yep. Let the record show that Councillor Perks was against that. And that's it, right? Item as amended. Okay, all those in favor, and that carries. Great. Thank you, everybody.
Double booking, I just have to step out for 1 second because I'm booked in another committee.
Item 13.5, plan to create supportive housing opportunities. First speaker, Kira Heineck.
begging the chair's, what's the word I'm looking for? Begging your permission, Chair, Andrea Adams needs to leave right away. Could we trade places? Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Kara.
Andrea? Okay, if I could just ask everybody for some silence, we'd like to proceed with the agenda. Thank you. Thanks to everybody. If I could just ask that you proceed with your conversations outside, that would be great. Thank you. Andrea, go ahead.
Well, first, I just wanted to say, as the executive director of an organization that develops and operates affordable housing specifically for people that are chronically homeless, how excited and relieved I am to see supportive housing addressed in the housing plan. I like to think that this is one of the early signs of how housing as a right will influence city policy. And my optimistic heart sees it as the snow is starting to melt in Narnia a little bit. I also appreciate that the city is committed to finding enough funds for 600 units per year and given some thought about how the first 600 units will be delivered. I can see that the city is looking at its existing resources that it can use to quickly deliver in the first year, which is really great as well. But I want to caution you about how realistic some of those ideas are, particularly without a funded increase to supply. 250 of the first year's 600 targeted units are hoped to be found within the private market, and 100 more of the same for every following year. The idea here is that if tenants are given enough money for rent and enough money for support, the city will access private market for supportive housing. It is an extension of the same wishful thinking that has been Toronto's sole strategy to address chronic homelessness, and I think it's going to work out just about as well. Portable housing allowances have been available for years now, and support funding has been attached for the last 2 years through Homes for Good. Tenants are armed with $800 a month in portable housing allowances and a 1 to 8 support worker, and diligent, skilled staff hunt every day for private market landlords willing to sign leases. In a year, my organization has been able to house about 8. And that is with 9 different agencies beating the pavement every day. Other organizations managing the same funding report similar or lesser successes. I know because I get frequent desperate calls for vacant units, which I don't have. To put it another way, if landlords were willing to let us, if private market landlords were willing to let us access their housing stock, it wouldn't have taken $200 million of CMHC funding at Mervis Village for 266 barely discounted rents for a period of 10 years. Rents are simply too high, even with $800 allowances, and anecdotally, the housing allowances are increasing rents in the few options left, such as rooming houses and substandard housing, which only serves to push more people out of housing. So as a strategy, the unintended consequences are self-defeating. The problem here is physics. No physical apartments in which to place a tenant with a housing allowance and support funding. To be honest, I don't have a solution or ideas about what can be done about increasing supply in year 1, as if even the funds were available, they wouldn't be able to be employed that quickly in any way that I can think of. But I do know that it simply does not have to be that hard to increase the supply of supportive housing in future years. The city has resources, it has land, but it has to make good use of that resource. First of all, it's going to mean directing CreateTO to create another band of income demographic to its Housing Now targets that represent people who are on ODSP and need supports to remain housed. It only makes sense that each site shoulders a share of this responsibility. That is what creates inclusive communities, and it provides a mechanism to ensure the city's targets are met. Secondly, there can be no more Housing Now sites going out for proposals at low densities. We simply don't have that luxury. We've heard a presentation about Warden earlier today and how the density needs to be increased. We have a second chance to do Block 36 North properly, a chance to triple density by adding 200 more units. In general, it is going to mean boulder massing. Planning practices will need to be revisited to limit the setbacks, which reduce housing supply and increase both the capital and the operating costs. So it's a triple hit. The increased density with boulder massing will increase both supply and affordability for supported housing. And thirdly, it's going to mean smaller apartment sizes. The Affordable Housing Design Guidelines severely limit the number of apartments a building can deliver. That means that about 25% less apartments in each building, and that each apartment within that building is more expensive to operate. Again, increased density from appropriate unit sizing will provide additional supply and affordability levels that can be used for supportive housing. In the context of a housing crisis, it is insensitive to insist that an apartment less than 590 square feet is inadequate to house people currently living in 10 square feet. If the intent is to ensure that high quality is delivered in exchange for government funds, more nuanced guidelines are required.
Thank you. You done? Yeah. Okay. Any questions? Seeing none?
Oh, we're here.
Oh, well, Councillor Wong Tam.
You raised the issue about the Housing Now initiative, perhaps being able to leverage that program to build more supportive housing. Can you elaborate on what it is your request is?
Yes, what I'm saying is that density provides affordability. So it increases the supply, and it makes the capital costs of each unit constructed less, and increased density makes operating costs lower. So when you're partnering with a private developer, which it seems to be, I mean, for better or for worse, it seems to be the mechanism that we're using. If a private developer has access to more density, then they have more flexibility to provide affordability.
Are you suggesting that we create a target number of units, or no?
Or supportive housing? Well, my colleagues believe it should be a third of the apartments on each site. I don't have myself a specific suggestion for what I think is reasonable there.
So the Housing Now report has already left the station. We've already stipulated that it's not going to be a third of the overall units that are being proposed, because a third will be home ownership and market ownership. A third will be some type of rental, and then a third will be then affordable housing with an additional component for deeply affordable. Where does supportive housing fit in all that?
Into the deeply affordable.
So out of the 1/3 of the 1/3, you're suggesting that 1/3, the final 1/3, is deeply affordable?
I'm saying that the currently scheduled deeply affordable housing can, a portion of that is proportionate to the number that you want to create out of the affordable housing targets would be appropriate to set aside for supportive housing. And I'd further suggest that wouldn't add an expense, because when I look at the 40% of AMR that's being considered for the deeply affordable units, that is accessible for people that are living on OW and ODSP when you layer the shelter component of their social assistance with the portable housing allowances.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? I do have a couple, just following up on this. So exactly on what you said. So we've established that 18,000 units are going to be dedicated for the supportive housing. Well, the bricks and mortars are, because we don't want to leave our partners in the province and the feds off the hook for the operating costs. But we've now committed that we would like to have 18,000 of the 40,000 for supportive housing. So we have on the Housing Now program 10% that are 40% AMR. So rank, is that enough to then, if the province was to add the supportive services to tackle supportive housing, the 549 a month? Or do we need to go deeper than that?
I don't think you need to go deeper than that if the province is still going to fund the portable housing allowances. Then that's plenty good enough.
Okay.
It even is good enough, really, for someone on ODSP whose shelter component is it approaches $500 a month right now. And most people that are on ODSP, for better or for worse, I'm not saying this is a good thing, use a portion of their living allowance towards their rent anyway. That is the reality. So in the range of 540.
What's the bracket, Andrea, for that if somebody receives those allowances? What is in our, you're saying 40, you're even saying maybe more, like can we go from 30 to 50% AMR? Is there a bracket or no?
I'm saying that someone on ODSP can afford an apartment that is $500 a month, and if they get a portable housing allowance, they can pay for something that is $1,300 a month. But what has to happen is that you make a conscious decision to set the units aside for them.
So it could be that as we're moving into some of these, for example, housing now, that even some of the higher brackets, if we designated,
yes, and
we
I
don't
think
even
that's
have
really
to pay for it, but just the fact that in our agreements in the future, if we designated that it is for people like that, that would be a big help.
That is my view, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. So, Kira Heineck.
Do you mind if we, Kira and I switch?
Sure, go ahead.
To flow the conversation about housing now and supportive housing, it might just keep the flow going. Thank you.
Sounds good.
So thank you for the time. My name is Brian Davis. I'm the Executive Director of House Lake Community Homes. We're a health-funded and city-funded supportive housing provider in Toronto. But I'm really here as chair of the Toronto Alliance on Homelessness Housing Development Working Group. And as most of you know, we're a diverse group of supportive housing, nonprofit housing providers, really dedicated to expanding the quantity and quality of rental housing stock and the necessary supports to those exiting chronic homelessness. So first of all, I just really want to commend SSHA and the Housing Secretariat for this ambitious and really comprehensive plan. I could tell when I read the report, you really left no stone unturned. But also we recognize that even with no stone unturned, we're really falling short of the $1,800 a year that we want to accomplish. So we do need to do more, we want to do more, and I believe we can. We're also painfully aware, certainly with our work on the ground, that relying on the for-profit sector is tenuous at best, even with the potential influence of the greater landlord apartments association. So with this in mind, we look forward to a stronger relationship between the nonprofit housing sector, key city departments, and other levels of government. And I'd like to focus on two specific areas. One is in regards to city activities and the Open Door program. We're really pleased to see a commitment to create a new approval stream for nonprofit providers, which we highlighted in a report last year. We actually suggested we take that a little step further and provide automatic relief from fees, changes, and taxes to all qualified nonprofit applicants who are creating permanently affordable supportive housing. This will remove a key systemic barrier where providers had to put up a lot of upfront money with no assurance that the fees would be waived. It would also quicken the development process for supportive housing because right now the Open Door program is on an annual cycle. Another key city activity, of course, we've talked a lot today, is about Housing Now, which is a huge opportunity to expand supportive housing. We're going to continue to strongly urge the city to be firm on a commitment to allocate 1/3 of the Housing Now rental units overall to people experiencing homelessness. Enhancing consideration to including supportive housing in all 11 sites we don't believe is enough. We believe you should set a target of 1/3 overall and make it part of the assessment review criteria. There is a number of health-funded providers that are eager to bring significant rent supplements and support resources to the table to look at achieving that target of 1/3. What's happening right now is we've been losing rent supplement units in the for-profit sector. So we're bleeding units in the for-profit sector where we need to and we want to apply somewhere. And Housing Now, we think, is a great opportunity. As for land use approvals, for our 2019 report also included recommendation to create a position at the city which would help expedite the approval process. This position could be a vital bridge between various city departments and in particular the Housing Secretariat and Planning. The other area that I want to speak to is just a broader supportive housing strategy. And we're pleased to see the acknowledgement in the staff report about the supportive housing growth plan. But for that plan to succeed, it's going to take extensive collaboration, coordination. We know that the federal government has new multi-year funding for affordable rentals. We know that the province has significantly more money for community mental health supports. So what we're doing right now is we're currently creating a comprehensive map of our building assets that we want to look at renewing and expanding. So if we can look at aligning better those other levels of government funding with our current resources, coupled with these city activities like Open Door and Housing Now, I believe we'll do a much better job in achieving the targets, and we as providers will have the long-term commitments required to move development project forward. In fact, this new coordinating position I refer to could act as a liaison with the Ministry of Health and other federal and the federal government if the city can negotiate this kind of collaboration with them. So in summary, we remain as providers fully committed to working with the city to harness all of our collective resources to address the crisis we're in. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce, can you expand a little bit more on what you were, Brian.
That's okay, thanks.
Oh, God. It's been a long day.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
On the, the losing of the rental in the private market?
So what we've done is, well, first of all, we meet monthly as the Toronto Mental Health and Addiction Supportive Housing Network, and we've done some recent research where in the past 2 years we've lost 65 units in the private rental market. What's happening is we head lease the unit from a for-profit landlord. 5-10 years ago, when a tenant would move on, we would be able to put in another client of ours. What's happening now is they're taking back those units. And so we have no place to put those rent supplements. And even when we have rent supplements, they're in very poor neighborhoods, with poor access and little amenities.
Okay. And so those rent supplements are given to your organization from the province?
That's right, as a full allocation, and then we head lease.
So you have a full allocation, and then you have more supports for your organization to provide all kinds of different social supports to the organization.
Yep, there's support funding accompanying with the rent supplement unit. And we just recently actually got more rent supplement money, a few of us, through Addiction Supportive Housing Program, and we have no place to put those units.
Okay. So I'm getting a little bit confused. When you say increase your target to 1/3 for supportive housing, are you now asking the city to start giving you those supplements?
No, we have the supplements.
Okay, so you have the
yeah, we have the supplements.
So you could use your supplements in a unit that is 80% AMR.
That's right.
Could literally,
yes, that's right.
You could so any of the 40,000 units are literally available for supportive housing. What you're asking is that we delineate specifically so you can use your supportive services.
It's delineate plus partner. Of
course, because it brings a level of affordability.
Yeah, I mean, it's also about the building design as well. Yeah. But it's also about, so regarding Housing Now for sure. If we could bring this provincial money together with Housing Now and coordinate it in a much better fashion.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other questions?
And thank you.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Brian. I guess I was trying to get this answer from Andrea.
Yeah.
And I think we were getting close, but I realized that I had misspoken. So under the Housing Now report, a third is home ownership, a third is rental, just market rental, whatever the market can bear. A third of it is supposed to be affordable housing, which is not to exceed 80%. And then out of that 1/3, the final leg of the third, at least 10% of it was supposed to be for the deeply affordable. So that brings us to about 370 units out of the 10,000 target goal for those 11 sites. So so I understand, is the recommendation that you're providing us is to take those 370 units to make sure that they are allocated for supportive housing? Or is it something bigger? Or is it all of the final third?
I think if we could look at taking as many units that are out of the AMR rental, like the 1/3, and making them accessible to people who need supports, then I think it's going to save money for the city around shelter costs, and and the challenge with Housing Now is when we're looking at targeting, the focus is mostly on low-waged earners, and I think we can do much better than that 10% of AMR, or the 10% of the 1/3 allocation.
So I guess then the challenge before us is that the initiative and the plan has just been adopted, and if we were to change that strategy, we would need staff to report back on what that implementation would look like. But if we don't do it, we're going to miss an opportunity. We'll release the 11 parcels into the world, and once they're gone, they're gone. So is it worthwhile for us to revisit the Housing Now plan?
So right now, my understanding is that there's a decision being made about 4 of the lands right now, but 8 more are going to be released. I know that there have been submissions that have been significantly higher than that 10%, and I will be really curious to see whether the city prioritizes those submissions that have gone over that minimum of 10% or not.
Okay. Thank you.
So I think it's part of the decision-making process right now on who's the successful bidder.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, thanks
thank you
for joining us. Next, Sean Mahar. Kira, sorry. I need to go back to Kira Heineck.
Thank you. Thank you for rolling with those changes. Brian is our expert on the development issues, so I was happy to have him here to answer your questions better than I could. So I'm Kira Heineck. I am with the Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness, and I'm going to also weave in a few comments that our chair, Mark Aston, would have made if he was here, but he wasn't able to stay. So he's on the list later down, and you won't have to go to him. So as we know, and as the report reminds us, we've got about 5,000 people in Toronto who are experiencing chronic homelessness, and that for most of them, the solution is supportive housing or housing with supports. So with this in mind, we congratulate city staff today on the progress evident in this report and the plan it lays out. Here's what we are particularly encouraged by. We're encouraged that the strategies in the plan really allow Toronto to step up in terms of taking an even more leadership role vis-a-vis the federal and provincial governments. Not any municipality in Toronto is not, nor should it, or sorry, in Ontario is not, nor should it be expected to be the major player in supportive housing and capital and operating. What we can do, and what this plan does do, is make sure that Toronto leads by example, committing in new and focused ways what is possible with its own resources. And in doing so, it bolsters our call, Toronto's call, on the other two orders to do their part. Secondly, the acknowledgement in this report that we still need a further developed joint multi-year supportive housing strategy and investment plan for Toronto is welcomed. As Brian said, we're pleased to see the mention of our own supportive housing growth plan in the report, and we'll continue to work closely with the city and others as that develops. We're very pleased in the report to see the commitment to continuing to move towards housing solutions to end homelessness, and from a broader TH perspective, maybe one of the more important things in the report. It demonstrates more clearly than any other report to date that SSHA and the Housing Secretariat understand how critical this shift is and what they need to recommend is done to make it happen. This includes the Welcome Pilot initiative to convert an existing shelter to permanent supportive housing. It's hard not to underscore how important this is and how important the commitment is to try this. It truly is the starting place of investing in housing to end people's homelessness. The pilot is responsibly conceived, seeking to create permanent homes with supports for people already living, quote unquote, in shelters, some for 10 years or longer. It will not displace anyone. It will create a more dignified and healthy environment for people. It'll cost less money, and it'll test out a new operating model. So we are very pleased with that and encourage that action to go forward. We're also pleased to see in the report the central role of the coordinated access to housing and supports. In particular, its collection and use of data to make responsive decisions in real time about how to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness so that they get the right housing and supports at the right time. And finally, its articulation of how increasing access to permanent homes for people experiencing homelessness will increase the flow through our emergency and respite systems. Flow, meaning more movement once people enter into homelessness to get them out, moves us closer to our collective goal that homelessness become rare, brief, and non-recurring. I'm just gonna pause for a moment.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Trying to work some motions around
I
here,
know,
so.
no, that's good. If you don't mind me going on at the same time. No, it's okay. I appreciate the process as well.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. It's just a little distracting, so I can't help but stop.
I'm sorry.
And I don't want to do that either, so I'll continue and try to stick to the main points. So let's move to what we think can be strengthened in the plan and what we'd like to see more of. One is to increase the pressure on the provincial and federal governments. This is a job for all of us, and we are pursuing what we can do in meetings and delegations with the other orders of government. And I will be back in a moment to speak to the next item just to encourage that intergovernmental work. We do believe there can be additional commitments from Toronto itself. As I said, the report does call on other orders of government, but we were very pleased to note in the report that it includes the city itself when it states, quote, that additional tri-level government investments are needed. So it doesn't let Toronto off the hook. And one strategy we urge this committee to consider in this area and to bring forward to the next council meeting is to set aside a dedicated allocation for permanent, affordable, deeply affordable, and supportive housing in the City Building Fund. As you probably know, the current fund has largely been used for transportation issues, of course important as well, but only $20 million over 4 years for the current Housing Now initiative has been set aside for housing. Nothing else has been, according to what I know now. If I'm wrong, I obviously stand to be corrected. But now that we have an extension of the City Building Fund, thanks to the mayor's and council's bold action there, you as a committee have an opportunity to ensure that an annual, predictable, stable allocation be identified from the City Building Fund towards building new permanent housing. Thirdly, we do think that, as many have said before me, that Housing Now can be improved to create more supportive housing. We do recommend a general 30% of all units, not of every site necessarily, but of the overall units, be committed to the creation of supportive housing. And I should say that's 30% of all rental units, just to, if that helps clear things up. We also recommend that Housing Now work with the Toronto supportive housing providers, which I'm starting to repeat Brian a little bit, so I'll just underscore that that is important too. We know we have a lot of people, agencies funded by the province with their rent subs, that with better coordination and targeting them to the right people, we can do more. And we're looking forward to seeing the results of the current call for proposals for Housing Now, and looking to see how many new supportive housing units are approved for construction. Again, to see if the city is able to go beyond that minimum 10%. We welcome the arrival of the new Executive Director of the Housing Secretariat, Abby Bond, to the city and to our work, and we look very much forward to working closely and continuing to work with her team to keep leveraging as many new supportive housing options as possible. And finally, and this is what Mark would have said if he could have stayed, we really believe that this plan can increase opportunities to address youth homelessness. We know that 30% of people experience their first instance of homelessness as children or youth, and that is over 60% if you're currently outside. And of the youth who are currently homeless, 43% of them are chronically homeless, meaning that they are our target group for people that need supports and supportive housing. 33% of them, not of the 43%, but 33% of all youth experiencing homelessness have been homeless for more than 12 months. So it's a really high amount of youth are chronically homeless. So we believe that we can bring in the housing, or that, working with the city, the Housing First model for youth could come out in the next version of this plan, and in Housing TO to address that issue. And in particular, because
I have to ask you to
about
wrap up. I gave you lots
prevention.
of extra time given the distractions that were going on.
I am finished.
Any
Perfect.
questions? Councillor Fletcher.
Thanks for being here. And I noted in the report, it talks about the motel properties.
Yes.
And it says that the acquisition of these properties doesn't appear to be something that could happen. There's a large number of families and singles that are housed in the motels on Kingston Road, are there not?
I believe
You're
so,
aware of?
yes. Oh, yes.
Are there any red flags for you that those could be bought, turned into housing, condos, and we'd be losing a significant section?
Only if you rip them down because they're full of walls.
Sorry. The question is for Ms. Kira.
I'm going to have to say that I don't have any expertise in whether they're a good business case to be made for the city to purchase those buildings. I have to trust what's in the report. But if your question, if I understand correctly, Councillor, that your question is about whether they perhaps might be bought by others and converted into condos and high market private rental or ownership, then my concern and the concern of the Alliance would be the same in any property that that might be well suited to supportive housing or lower income housing, that there's a interest to explore whether that's feasible for the city to work with that space. But I really don't have any expertise on whether those buildings in particular are the right ones, unfortunately.
I'll ask staff about this one because it's a time bomb.
Thank you. So Kira, I just, I'm really trying to understand the commitments that we have and how we make sure that we go towards those commitments. So we have 40,000 units in our HOT plan. We've committed to have 18,000 dedicated to staff. So it's way more than 1/3 actually.
Yes.
And now we're doing our implementation plan, and we're going to be doing we're going to be working with all of our stakeholders and so on, how we're going to, translate all that into reality. All I'm trying to understand is, those 18,000 units, for example, our housing now has an average of 80% AMR with a minimum of 10%. So we're starting to see bids that have some at 40%, some at 60%, some at 80%. So there's a huge mix, which is actually healthy and good. But if we allocate a whole bunch of units, even at 60% and 80% and the 40% to the supportive housing sector, you guys can work with that. That's good, as long as the province obviously comes with the operating supplements. Is that correct? Am I understanding the model okay?
That is my understanding as well. As I said, Brian would be more of the expert, and I'd be happy to bring him back up if that would help clarify. I think, though, as well, that there's something, not symbolically, but there's something important around demonstrating leadership when the city says, okay, of these 11 sites, we want to demonstrate our commitment to increasing access to supportive housing by targeting a minimum number. The 10% of the 30%, which, as you said, leaves us with under 400
But that's where
units.
I'm getting confused, because in reality, I'm trying to understand, is 40% of AMR the only thing that you're considered good for supportive housing? Or if you have a unit that is at 60% AMR, can that be considered supportive housing? That's what I'm trying to understand from the sector.
Yeah.
You're telling me, yes, that as long as you have the supportive services from the province, that yes, you can work with that. You're now working with private sector landlords. So I'm trying to understand, which one is it? Is it only 40% that is considered supportive housing, or can you guys work with other ones as well?
I think that really depends on the income available to the person who's being supported. And if we're talking about creating spaces for people who are chronically homeless, it's going to be extremely low, depending if they are in receipt of Ontario Works or ODSP. And so the 40% makes a lot of sense for that group, which we're primarily concerned with. There are others, of course, who need supports, but may not be in that depth of poverty or have that little income. But even then, there is, I think, an interest in maybe targeting a third of the rental units in housing now for nonprofit development, which brings in supports and can also broker those relationships with provincially funded supports. And where the organizations have a mandate to maintain those homes as supportive, accessible, deeply affordable homes for people exiting homelessness. Again, I'm not a development expert, forgive me, but I think that there's also part of what we're asking for is the designation for more nonprofit development with
Managing and operating and having first dibs into those units, right?
Either nonprofit or in partnership, has been said. And the report does talk about enhancing considerations. We know we need to do some more work, or you all need to do some new work. Ms. Bond needs an opportunity to play with housing now, but we'd like to, perhaps there could be a place to make nonprofit developers more competitive if they're providing the kind of access.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. Just to understand, with respect to people who require supportive housing, sometimes they're coming out of homelessness. Is that correct?
I would say often, but not entirely.
No, not exclusively. But those who do require supportive housing is because they cannot live independently on their own without the range of wraparound supports.
Yes.
Some of those supports can be light, and you perhaps a visit once a week, perhaps from a health practitioner.
Yes.
Or sometimes it requires multiple visits a day from a range of practitioners. Is that not correct?
Absolutely.
And so that generally means that whoever is requiring supportive housing, whether they're coming out of street-involved activity, or perhaps deep homelessness, or perhaps just a low-income individual, or perhaps living with Ontario disabilities, whatever the criteria that's sort of wrapped around an individual, most likely they are living below the poverty line. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Most likely.
Yeah. So having affordable rents, whether it's 60 or for perhaps even 40% at AMR, that is still going to be very expensive for that individual. Is that not correct?
Yes.
So if we are going to truly make it work for those who require affordable housing, then then we need to make sure that it's the number that's deep. It's the quantum that's going to be deeply affordable, which is the 370 allocation out of the 10,000. But the 370 allocation out of the 10,000 is going to fall short of meeting that overall goal of 1,800 units a year.
Yeah.
So we need to rethink on housing now, and because when housing now first was adopted in January 2019, we weren't really having this big conversation about supportive housing at the city, were we?
No, I think we've all been learning a lot more since then about how this plays together. And one piece that we haven't talked about, which also I think probably plays a role, is the part of Housing TO commitment to redefine affordability and what we mean by deeply affordable in the city, moving away from it being linked to AMR. So that there may be another opportunity to update or refine housing now based on some of the work done in Housing TO.
Okay.
If that's helpful, because that then looks at tying access to supportive housing to people's actual income, not to what rent is or what AMR is, if I'm not mistaken.
That is helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thanks. Thank you, Kira.
Thank you. Thank you for the extra time.
Sean Mahar. Oh, sorry. Richard Rayburn. Richard? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for having me here. And hello, members of the Planning and Housing Committee. My name is Mr. Richard Rayburn. I'm with the Member Advocacy Committee at St. Stephen's Community House. I'm speaking with you today about supportive housing. This is a top priority for many participants at St. Stephen's. We took part in the 2010 consultations for housing opportunities, Toronto. At the time, we called for 2,000 new units of supportive housing a year to be created by the City of Toronto. This call was made by the Wellesley Institute, and we supported it. Every day, we see people at our corner drop-in and in our overdose prevention site who need supportive housing. Their struggle is with poverty, homelessness, addictions, mental health issues, trauma, and physical disabilities. Supportive housing would actually save money, as people would not end up on the street, in jail, and in the hospital emergency rooms. They would spend less time in shelters. We've seen supportive housing help people to stabilize and become engaged community members. I know when I first came here, nearly 18 years ago from Montreal, Quebec, it was a little difficult to find a place. And, I settled on one of those small closet space rooming houses, and it was difficult and discouraging because even though it was geared to income, there was a lot of action going on, especially when it came into gangs and whatnot. And this is just in the annex. So I would like to see improvement on that level. But at the same time, we'd like to see more supportive housing built by the city every year to address the need we see. This need has exploded in the last decade, and as part of a homelessness crisis that only worsens as time goes on, we would like you once again to commit to building the 2,000 units supportive housing every year. Like, for example, At Home was one good program that was actually able to help quite a few people, including myself, when I was volunteering with St. Stephen's and trying to actually get a better living environment that was well adjusted for my income. And of course, At Home still has a very good track record because they also have the services that are provided for the tenant. So let's say if the tenant does have maybe some issues with health, obviously the next step would be in at least sending that tenant to the right channels and right people. Now, we do see one issue that is a great concern to us is that you have identified the possibility of converting a shelter site into supportive housing for long-term shelter stayers. This is basically taking from one budget, which is already underfunded, and putting the funds into the supportive housing budget. We know that shelters operate at 100% capacity and need more funding. It does not make sense to close a shelter down. The funding must come from somewhere else. The same problem comes up when you talk about converting 100 units of public housing in TCHC into supportive housing. The new supportive housing must add to the overall number of housing units, not keep the total the same overall. So with that, we are looking forward to working with you. We shouldn't have to have an American musician come down here and say, hey, I'm going to make buildings in Toronto. I know it's not going to include for people who are there to income, because that's what's happening. So we need to take a little bit more of a serious look at that. And once again, the services are there. I am working also with a study with Unity Health, St. Michael's and St. Stephen's, which is the housing and mortality study. Because we do have also, unfortunately, situations where folks can get housed, but they are still dying, either because they don't have the right kind of support system to help them through, right? That along with, well, if you don't have enough money and maybe if someone is on $800 of an Ontario disability check and their rent is like $1,000, they could only hope and pray that they get some type of assistance with Housing First or an at-home study. So
Thank you. I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up.
Thank you.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Sean Mahar.
Wow, I never like going on after Kira and Brian, but going on after Richard is quite a challenge. I'm going to try and say many of the same things Richard said, a lot less eloquently. My name's Sean Maher. I'm here on behalf of the Housing Issues Network, which is a network of 35 housing providers, advocacy organizations, and research groups, as well as people with lived experience. And first off, I just want to say congratulations. As one of our members said at the discussion we just had about this report, it's nice to see supportive housing getting this kind of attention from City Council. These are great goals. It's a comprehensive look, and we're excited to see that. That said, the implementation strategy is a serious concern for the folks in our network, and I think, as you've heard today, folks all across the city, largely because the resources that you need to meet this aren't really independently there to achieve this goal. This set of plans, with its many virtues, relies largely on taking existing units and deploying them for supportive housing. Supportive housing we desperately need, but to make this work in a sustainable way, we're going to have a real increase in the supply of purpose-built, affordable bricks and mortar units. That's just the unavoidable mathematical consequence of the low vacancy environment that we're working in. That absolutely means a predictable capital funding stream from the city that's going on a going-forward basis to provide a way to build the new units that make up for the units that are being cannibalized to achieve the goals of this report. When you look at what this report draws on, I think that's pretty inescapable. It draws, as Richard just said, on shelter beds. But our shelters are totally full. Providing more supportive housing is a great way to reduce the extent that they're full, but we certainly can't be doing that until we've met the capacity requirements of those existing shelters, and that's not something that we have been able to do. It draws on TCHC units, and TCHC is a great environment for building this kind of affordable housing, but TCHC still has a waiting list that is pretty long, and it has been growing steadily over the last decade, consistently. With the loss of Fir Grove, it got a little bit longer, so we will need to replace those units somehow. And the area where we rely most for the addition of units is in turning to the Greater Toronto Apartment Association to get landlords to free up about 200 units. Right now, landlords are renting to people with perfect rental histories and great credit scores, and they are renting everything that they want to rent without having to look at anybody else. So it's not clear what is going to cause the private rental market to change so sharply that they'll dedicate almost 10% of all of the vacant units in Toronto to this purpose. That is especially clear when you hear from the supportive housing providers who came and spoke today and others who are out there who will tell you that there are literally hundreds of rent supplements seeking exactly those same units right now. And so trying to add 200 more to that list is not a realistic mechanism for providing for supportive housing. And I want to underscore the fact that that particular component of the plan is a very big concern. There has been an increasing reliance on the private sector to provide the affordable housing we need, and the evidence is pretty consistent in showing that we pay more and get less with that mechanism. Through Open Door, we have paid private developers about twice what we pay nonprofit developers for every month of affordability that we get. At Mirvish Village, the federal government got 266 units at rents of $2,000 a month for 10 years in exchange for $200 million, enough to build 800 nonprofit units at 80% of market rent in perpetuity. As some of the committee members around here noted earlier today, we are not getting the mileage out of our resources that we could get if we applied our funds most effectively. The taxpayers, as well as homeless people in Toronto, would benefit a lot if we did that. To Councillor Balau's earlier question about the relationship between the needed units and the proposed units at 40% and 80% of market rent, that relationship is really clear. The problem and the challenge that we have is in the nature of those units, the stability of this and the supplements and the volume of both. None of those things are in place. So in theory, that all works, but in practice, the pieces aren't all there. So the ideal augmentation to this very strong and forward-looking report on a badly needed supply of supportive housing is to clearly identify an annual predictable investment of real city dollars to actual purpose-built affordable bricks and mortar units so that we don't have to cannibalize ones we have but need in order to create supportive homes, and to do so in the most cost-effective way by adequately leveraging the nonprofit sector to create them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Emily Daigle? Emily? Is she left? Oh, there she is.
Sorry, Madame Bailey. By the way, guys, this is the best guy in AV. He's helped me fight for a lot of accessibility. If it wasn't for people like him, these tables wouldn't exist. That's something I fought for, I admit. So very simply put, what is supportive housing? I know what it is, you know what it is, but what is it honestly? I ask this for two questions. One, I have a close friend who lives in a building. He came out of homelessness. He came out of living in motels. He was put into this unit on Dawes Road, in a particular building on Dawes Road. And if you're the counselor for that area, you know the exact building. It's been a problem to this city for years and years and years. He goes through bug sprayings every few months. He gets no help. He has no support. He's totally blind. He also has some slight physical disabilities. He doesn't know I'm here, but I know his situation, what he's been through from day one. Where are the supportive services for people with disabilities who are put in these rent supplement / supportive housing buildings? Where's the community wraparound supports? Not everyone that comes out of homelessness is able-bodied or simple disabilities. They can do things in 40 different languages, but God forbid you need Braille or large print. It's an experience I've had within the shelter system as well. I had to take the shelter system to the city ombudsman. I am one of the victims of the Toronto affordable housing strategy. I'm now in a place where I have no supports. All my services are gone. My community's gone. We're fully isolated with nothing. Closest food bank is an hour and a half away or 3 buses or come to Toronto. But that's even hard because unfortunately TTC doesn't like the fact that when you're blind or legally blind and you live outside the city, you have to pay full fare in Toronto unless you live here. But supportive housing needs to be more than just a rent supplement. I know many of you realize this, that you want to do a 40% AMR. And I've been here on every topic because who else in wheelchairs is going to show up to these meetings? Very rarely anyone but me shows up who's in a wheelchair and fights for things. ODSP for 2 people, multiply disabled, is $769 a month, maximum rent subsidy. If you have an intercom in your building that needs to use a phone, they won't pay for it if you're on that max rent. We pay for medical supplies. I have to pay for my test strips for my diabetes because we only are allowed $200 of them a year. Wow, thank you, Brad, for listening. Many people don't understand that when you're on ODSP, it doesn't cover everything. Many people don't understand that people with disabilities have extra costs. I was forced out of where I was in an assisted living apartment in Kristen Wongtam's ward, well, her new part of her ward. Supportive assisted living, I was forced out due to rent increases. I'm multiply disabled, not just a wheelchair. You guys know me around here, but you don't know my story. You don't know people like me that have been forced out of their homes, out of their communities, out of their support networks. It's going to happen more if you don't start dealing with this. Supportive housing is great for chronically homeless. I've been homeless. You only have 4 rooms in this city for couples that are multiply disabled. And when you're in that shelter in the East End family res, they don't know where to go for housing for people with disabilities. They don't do large print or Braille. I had to take them to the ombudsman. So if I've got to take them to the ombudsman, how do I know that supportive housing is really going to support people with disabilities? How many more people with disabilities are going to end up in crap holes like Dawes Road or 250 Morningside without supports, without help? How many more of us with multiple disabilities are going to die on the streets? Like my friend in December who died in a bus shelter in his wheelchair because he couldn't get the proper supports in the shelter.
Thanks, Emily. Last thought? All good?
How many more bodies are we going to have on your hands? Support us, please.
Thank you, Emily. Any questions? Seeing none. Thanks for joining us today. Next speaker, Isabella Genk. There you go, all ready. 5 minutes. You can keep track on.
Is that on?
Yep,
Okay.
it is on.
My name, hello everyone. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Isabella Gamp. I'm a member of ACORN, as you can see, but I'm also the founder and organizer of POOF, Protecting ODSP OW Funding. I'm also on ODSP myself. I'm also a tenant of TCHC. Prior to living into TCHC, I did have the housing allowance program, and I had it for a few years, for 8 years. The first 5 years, I got $500 towards my rent. After that, it got cut down to $250. And then and then I had to make up the difference out of my out of my basic needs. So, and then I had problems with other tenants. So I waited 20 years for Toronto Housing. I had to change my application at least 20 times. And to finally get into Toronto Housing, I had to cancel the one bedroom and go down to get a bachelor to get in, just to get out of the hellhole where I was before. Now, the problem is, I got out of I moved into a bachelor at 460 Jarvis, and then that was too small. There was a box hanging down in the bathroom that I kept hitting my head on when I'm trying to have a shower. You know, and so I finally got into a building that I wasn't even on my list, but because of my height, they figured that would be a good building for me. I asked them about noise. They said there would be no problem with noise, so I signed the lease. I've had nothing but noise since I moved in. You know, I put in so many noise complaints. I've proven to management and security. 2 different times I've proven that noise in the bedrooms cannot be heard in the hallway. So you can call security when you're getting woken up in your bedroom all the time, and they're turning around and say, oh, you know what? The security went and looked for they couldn't find it. You know what? We're not listening to your. I said, wait a minute. I got recordings. Oh. Well, you know, all of a sudden the story changed. But I still have the same problem with the noise. Nobody wants to do nothing about this. Okay? So the thing is, I have to move now. I have a beautiful unit. They're supposed to finally, after 3.5 years of fighting, to get my counters raised up and my sinks and mirrors and cupboards and everything so that I don't have to bend over and hurt my back every time. As you can see, I'm using a roll cushion because I have pressure sores on my bottom. They finally gave me a wheelchair a couple of weeks ago. But you know what? That's not even set up properly, so I can't even use that. It's sitting in my house. After fighting for that, you know, my doctor put in 4 times for a wheelchair, and then they were going to deny it even again, but my workers put in for an appeal, and they finally gave it to me. So that's that. Now, about the noise problems. You know, security can go and knock on somebody's door where the noise is coming out, but these people do not have to answer their door. They do not even have to open their door. They don't even have to say anything. They can just keep the music going, and nothing gets done. You know, I've watched when I took my dog out in the morning at 6 in the morning. I've watched where 2 guys have carried an unconscious woman into the building at 200 Wellesley, and I watched security sit there and do nothing, and you know, not even ask what's wrong with this woman. Maybe they should be calling an ambulance to make sure that this woman is not being sex trafficked. You know, these are problems that are in Toronto Housing that are being ignored. You know, this is why, you know, I agree that we need affordable housing at the moment, but I would personally love to see affordable, subsidized, rent-geared income housing. Take the friggin' and throw it in the garbage, because it's not helping anyone. It just keeps people in poverty and keeps us more stressed out and angry and miserable. You know, because I can't move out of Toronto Housing now. I'm trapped. I'm trapped. How do I get a place to live where I can get some sleep more than 2 nights a week? How do I do that? I can't move out because we don't have no rent shelter. You know, our rent to shelter allowance for disability is $497 a month. Even if you double it, as I'm asking, that's $994. You know what? That's still short from renting a 1-bedroom or a bachelor apartment. You know, you talk about homeless people and these units that you're going to make for affordable housing for 10,000 units over 10 years. You know what? There's 10,000 homeless people right now that are visible. There's 30,000 homeless that are invisible, that are couch surfing around Toronto.
Isabella,
no, this is wrong.
I'm going to ask you to wrap up.
But you know, okay.
5 minutes.
Well, you know, everybody else got 12 minutes, 14 minutes. I've been sitting here for 7 hours. And you want to cut me off after 4 minutes?
I'm asking you to wrap up because you're reaching 5 minutes.
You know what? The repairs don't get done. I've got a hole in my wall in my bathroom for 3.5 weeks. I've got lung issues. I'm multiple. I have 16 different permanent disability illnesses that if any one of them will keep me on disability. You know, I get up and I walk and I fight. You know, because nobody else will fight for me. I shouldn't have to. There should be able-bodied people like everybody in this room fighting for us.
Thank you,
Isabella. I would like to see the City of Toronto start fighting for the province to get people more money on their disability.
Isabella, thank you.
This is the problem.
Thank you.
You know,
is there any?
If you want to keep Toronto housing better, let me finish, please. Everybody else got a chance. Why can't I have a chance? You know, if you want to make Toronto housing more livable and more enjoyable, and so people take more pride in living there, then you let them paint their front door so they have a little bit of ownership, a little bit of pride in their unit. What is wrong with doing that? Why does everybody have to feel like they're I get this all the time. I get so many messages from people. They feel like they're a warehouse. Nobody cares. There is no support. I should have support. I can't get it.
Okay.
You know?
Thank you.
You know,
Any
this is
questions?
wrong.
Seeing none. That was the last speaker for the item. Are there questions to staff?
Everybody else got 12, 15, 20 minutes, and I get them cut off over and over.
Questions of staff? Anybody has questions of staff? No? I actually, yeah. Just a couple of questions to staff. Do we have any information, or would you be able to present to us an economic impact study on supportive housing?
To the chair, yes, that's a really interesting question. The Housing Secretariat and I have already started talking about what that might look like. There's clearly an economic argument to be made for supportive housing, especially when we have 20% of our shelter system, or about 5,000 people every year using the shelter system as housing. It makes much more sense, both from a human perspective, but also a financial perspective, to provide proper housing.
Okay. How many units do we have of supportive housing right now in Toronto?
So the complete number is hard to know, because there's not one service system manager as there is for shelter. What we do know is that the City of Toronto administers just over 10,000 supportive housing apartments in the city. The total amount of funding that flows through us is about $70 million. About 20 million of that is city money. But the majority of that 20 million was actually part of legacy programs, and we were mandated to provide some cost sharing. The only solely city-funded supportive housing is some that we created under GSR, and that's about $2 million. That's the only supportive housing that so far the city has solely funded.
So, so you would say that with the, and how many units is that you said? The one that we solely fund?
I think it's about 40, but I'll get the number.
40 units?
Yeah.
And then everything else is costed by the provincial federal funds?
About 20% is cost shared with us.
Cost share?
And the rest is solely funded by other levels.
Okay. Okay. And on, as we are working on the implementation of the housing plan that is coming in June, because how we're going to deliver affordable housing, but also these units, you're going to be able to delineate and give us a little bit more in depth at how all these units are going to come online. Can we expect that as well?
Yes, through the chair. It's our aim to provide a more comprehensive view of how those 18,000 units will be delivered through the implementation plan. But we're not waiting for that. We're also trying to progress the delivery of supportive housing through the Housing Now initiative, and specifically through the sites which are currently under negotiation. We hope to report back to Council on that with the results of our learnings and the results of those negotiations.
Yeah, and we've been working with the sector, the supportive housing providers, because I think what it sounds to me is that we're entering into a territory that we haven't been before, being a lot more involved in delivering these. So I think that we all really need to work together to do a good job of delivering what actually the housing providers need. So that dialogue is really important. Is that happening? Is there?
Yeah, we're definitely starting that. The Housing TO plan identifies in a number of different places, calls for us to work very closely with the nonprofit and co-op housing sector, specifically around actions to deal with homelessness. And of course, supportive housing is one of the most effective ways to respond to that crisis. So we're going to be initiating a number of different actions under that plan to help us deliver more supportive housing and to involve our partners in bringing both their money that they've received through federal and provincial dollars, but also getting more money from those levels of government to deliver on supportive housing.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Sorry, I've just asked. I have two questions. With respect to the suggestion of converting a shelter into supportive housing and that transitional piece, is there a particular site that you are already thinking of?
No, but we're looking at the different sites that we have and talking with some of the operators that operate the current shelters to make sure that the person that or the unit that's selected has an operator that's used to doing housing, and also what the impact would be on the people that are currently there. Ideally, what you'd want to do is have a program that has long-term shelter users currently there that don't have to experience any change in their living accommodation except for how we fund it.
And because council has set a goal of 1,000 units of shelters to be produced, shelter beds to be produced, if you convert a shelter into supportive housing, and by way of just pulling a number out of the air, 100 shelter beds, does that mean you have to then reintroduce that 1,000 shelter beds, so it's 1,001? Because what would the accounting look like here?
I think it would probably depend on the site that ended up getting selected. If we identified one of the sites that is part of the 1,000-bed project, we'd probably have to talk about it as we've delivered on 1,000 new spaces, 900 of which are shelter and 100 of which are housing. But if it's a site that's already currently a shelter, then that would be separate from that. It really depends on how that identification of the site goes.
Okay, thank you. And just because we have the chance, because Abigail, welcome to this committee. Nice to see you. With respect to the City of Toronto's current approach, I recognize you just got here, so it may not be an entirely fair question, but I'm just so curious, because all we've ever heard was that Vancouver's been able to achieve a whole number of objectives that the City of Toronto has not. Perhaps it's because you had 3 orders of government all talking about housing at roughly the same time. And we've been focused on transit for the past decade. Now we're talking about housing and with the same type of energy. And so what do we need to do at the City of Toronto based on what you're seeing just early days in order for us to achieve our milestones? Because right now we've set a lot of targets, but we've consistently fallen short.
So specifically in relation to supportive housing, the success that Vancouver has experienced over the last decade, where they've been able to bring approximately over 2,000 units of new supportive housing on stream, is largely because of the partnership between the city and the provincial government, where the city will provide land and the provincial government will provide the capital and also the operating dollars. And then also the contracts with the non-profit providers who then provide supports in those buildings. So that's been a very effective partnership. It's not a cheap form of housing to produce. It has ongoing operating requirements. So that's why the city on its own could never have delivered on that kind of partnership.
And where did the federal government participate in any of this creation of new supportive housing in BC?
So the federal partnership, the federal government has been a more recent actor at the table with regards to those discussions. But yes, in recent times they have been involved. They provided Innovation Fund money to trial modular housing in Vancouver, which was a unique form of new supportive housing. But increasingly, through their co-investment fund and their rental financing initiative, those things are very important factors in municipalities being able to deliver rental housing more cheaply, more affordable, and more able to deliver to the needs of their population.
And just so I understand, because it's important for us to set targets, so therefore we know baseline, this is where we are. In 10 years, this is what we'd like to achieve. Was it the City of Vancouver's objective to achieve the 2,000 units of new supportive housing over a 10-year period? Was that your goal? And it sounds like if it was, then you met it. Or was that just what you achieved, but your goal was 5,000?
So the city had a number of targets. The original target was around 1,500 units. That was delivered over about a 5 to 7 year period. And more recently, the target is around 600 units a year. The city has not been able to achieve all of the funding for all of those uses on an ongoing basis, but they did deliver through that partnership 600 units, and I believe there are about another 300 that are under negotiation right now. So having a target is important. It's those ongoing discussions with all levels of government that actually helps you able to deliver on the target, but you have to have the target, I think, to start with in order to focus those discussions.
Okay, fantastic, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, speakers? Councillor Cressy.
Well, thank you. How are you, Councillor Fletcher? I'll be very brief because you've had a very long day. First of all, I want to thank city staff for what I believe is a tremendous report in front of us. If our objective collectively is to not simply shelter the homeless, but to end homelessness, this report, I think, represents a very big step forward. And I think it represents a big step forward because as a city, we can end chronic homelessness. Not on our own, with all levels of government, but ending chronic homelessness, the situation whereby people are living in shelters, is possible and can be done. Can we end homelessness full stop? I'm sad to say, with all the upstream factors at play, we cannot. Not right now. But we can ensure that when people are homeless, as our staff tell us again and again and again, it is brief, it is rare, and it is reoccurring. And so what does success look like going forward? Success looks like is a situation whereby people are not falling into the homelessness trap, whereby we as a city are building shelters, but there is no pathway out of the shelters. And so that requires, and we just heard from our new executive director of the Housing Secretariat from the BC example, all levels of government. We cannot do this on our own. But if we have a target of 18,000 units over the next 10 years, and we have a plan to build 600 units or create 600 units this year, on a go-forward basis, let's create those 600 each and every year. And let's use that as an impetus to call on the other levels of government to ensure that those operating funds and the wraparound supports are in place, and their capital funds to create the other 2/3 arrive on time. And so I want to commend staff for this report. I want to thank the chair of this committee for her unwavering support on this, and I know there is an amendment coming that I've worked with the chair on. And we've been rolling the rock up the hill on supportive housing as a council for a number of years, and this is a big step to help get it over the ledge and keep it moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Perks.
So we heard from Mr. Mahar and also similarly from Councillor Cressy that we as a city could be taking action here and need to maybe push the envelope a little bit. So I was sitting here thinking, okay, how big is the envelope? What's the size of the challenge we have? And, you know, God bless city staff for trying to explain the alphabet soup of federal and provincial programs, which seem to get renamed every year and the rules get changed every 6 months. Following that just gives me a headache. So I thought, throw all that out and let's just ask how big this problem is. So we see we're building about 600 units a year. We want to get to 1,800 units a year. So let's say 10,000 over 10 years, just as a round number to help us get started. If you go out and you just want to build a unit of housing, you don't own the land, you just want to build a unit of housing, that's $500,000.
Million?
So $500,000, like if land costs and everything included, right? Just as a round number. So that's $5 billion to get the 10,000 units. At the cost of borrowing $1 billion right now for 30 years, we can do that at 2.55%. So the annual carrying cost of that is $128 million. I ask what the subsidy we have to provide to make the difference between a regular housing unit and a supportive housing unit. That's $2,300. So for 10,000 units, that's $23 million. So it's $151 million a year to get 10,000 units of supportive housing. Now, forgetting all about whether the federal and provincial governments come to the table, that's about a 5% tax increase, a little bit less than that. 5% tax increase on the average home in the City of Toronto is $200 a year. We could solve this problem without anyone from any other order of government coming forward. We can solve this problem without having to figure out if we can shuffle around the current uses on city-owned land. We could just go out and buy the land and do it for $200 per homeowner in the City of Toronto per year. That's the size of the problem that we have. Now, we should, of course, be looking to see if we can bring publicly owned land in to lower that number, if we can bring other orders of government in to lower that number. But it is completely doable even if the other governments don't come to the table. It is only because we never just clear the brush of all the complicated ifs, ands, or buts about the federal programs and provincial programs that we don't put it in a starting place in those terms. $200 per property taxpayer per year, and 10,000 supportive housing units could be built, even if everything else goes wrong. It's that simple. Now, I know Councillor Cressy is asking for a motion that Councillor Bailao will put forward to try to get some budget numbers into future budgets. I'm quite happy to share my math with anyone on city staff as they're preparing that submission for next year's budget and the years coming forward.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Wong-Tam.
Yes, thank you very much. And I do have two motions. The first one is to amend recommendation number 4 so that it actually, this is regarding the piece around the George Street revitalization. I'm hoping that I could be consulted in those discussions leading up to final decision making around, I guess, service agreements. I can't imagine it being a problem since local councillors are usually part of those negotiations. Not negotiations, but just in terms of, just letting us know what's going on so we can then convey that information to our residents. And also to the next motion is to ask the deputy city manager as part of the implementation plan for housing TO, the major action plan, to report back in June 2020 on the feasibility of allocating a target of 1/3 of the remaining Housing Now rental units for the creation of new supportive housing. And I know that the DCM is going to be reporting back anyway, so thank you for working with me on this motion. My original motion was just to say make it happen, but I was alerted that it can't just happen, and so therefore it needs to come back to this particular committee, which I think is fine. Actually, in June. Okay, thank you. Which I think is still good because it allows us to sort of think through what exactly are we going to do to try to make sure that we can build an additional 1,800 units and meet that target every year annually. And at the same time, we've got city assets and city real estate that are about to leave the station, and we haven't maximized that outcome and hopefully that return. So I think that, number one, staff need to be applauded for this report. I thank you for doing the deep work. I think it's actually new territory and in some ways pretty exciting to see the City of Toronto and Council take up the charge in trying to advance supportive housing. The challenge has always been around the supportive housing and the debate between shelter and supportive housing is what do you do for those individuals who are immediately in trouble today? They cannot wait till we hit the goal of 1,800 in a year because they're on the streets and they're hurting today. What do we do today when the shelters are at capacity and everyone that works to support that system is feeling so strained. So it's not to me, it's not always an issue about either or. It's about how do we actually keep it all going. Yes, one day we'd like to eliminate any particular need for shelters, but I think we recognize that there will always be some need for emergency shelters. But if we haven't filled the other rungs in the particular housing ladder, then this is probably one piece that we need to put some focus on, which means that if we haven't been focusing on it over the last 10 years, perhaps this is the portion that we give more attention to because we're now playing catch up. And I'm encouraged, Abby, to know, Abigail, to know that you've had this experience and also these successes working with the other orders of government. I've learned recently about something called the Jordan Principle. And the Jordan Principle is, for those who don't know, it speaks to a challenge within the Indigenous community where a young Indigenous person fell and ill and died. And while they were sort of in the midst of being negotiated, is it a provincial matter? Is it a state matter? A territorial matter? Is it a city responsibility? Is it a provincial responsibility? While every order of government was debating who's responsible for the welfare of this individual, that individual passed. So the Jordan Principle is whoever finds the problem is responsible for it. And we then go fight for the funding and the resolution and the operational pieces afterwards. We have already done that, and we've shown extraordinary leadership with the refugees that have come into the city by just saying we're going to house them. However we're going to house them, we will take care of it, and then we will get the bill, and we will pay for the bill, and then we're going to start rattling about and telling the other orders of government, you owe us, by the way, $44 million, because we took on that responsibility when we've done the settlement for you. So we've already invoked the Jordan Principle. So Council has already led the way by not delaying progress or outcomes because it's somebody else's responsibility. And I do think that we reached the point in the housing crisis and emergency that the residents of Toronto don't care whose responsibility is. They just want us to get it done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Montam. Any other speakers? No, we're good. Councillor Fletcher, good? All good? Okay, I'm just going to say a few words and try to be quick as well. I do have some motions. First motion that Councillor Cressy, sorry, this is the impact study, and this is, as many people mentioned in here, I think there needs to be clear communication with the other orders of government on the impact that actually supportive housing has. I think we all are very aware of the human impact. We found when we had the Toronto Community Housing campaign, when we started with that advocacy efforts to the provincial and federal government, it was really important to demonstrate what impact these decisions have in all our budgets, in all our governments, and how by working together, by contributing to the solution, we actually all benefit, not only as a society and as a human principle, but even economically. And that a lot of these decisions are actually the smartest thing to do economically as well and financially as well for all of us to invest in these things. So this is just basically some information, gathering some information to really support, I think, the efforts that many of us are doing on advocating for all three orders of government to invest in supportive housing. And the second motion I do have is in getting the numbers for the 2021 budget on the 600 units, and again, call on the other orders of government to support the operating. I'd like to thank staff, and I do appreciate some of the aspects of this report. First of all, because as staff responding through my questioning, we're actually entering into territory that the City of Toronto has not entered before. We've never built supportive housing in this city. So let's make that clear. We've never built supportive housing in this city. Well, City Home. Okay. The reality is that we now have this on the table. However, I think many people agree that there are aspects that are nonprofits and that supportive housing will need that are very much the responsibility of our partners, and we should continue to advocate to have them come to the table. For example, I had a meeting just yesterday with one of my drop-ins that I have in my area, and if I told you that they've told me that the other day they had somebody sent from a hospital in Toronto on a stretcher, completely naked, to one of our drop-in centers. That is what we have right now in front of us. So that is not an excuse. That is a healthcare responsibility that should be taken care as a healthcare issue and done by the healthcare system. And I don't think it is. We should let other orders of government download those responsibility on us. These are all our citizens, and we all have responsibilities to take the best human care and the best care for our citizens. So I do appreciate the focus on the modular supportive housing. As Councillor Wong-Tam said, there's a certain speed that we need, and we need to not only say let's work on supportive housing, but actually how do we do some of this quicker? So I think an interesting model on the modular supportive housing is really interesting. And I do think that ultimately having some of our shelter spaces being used as supportive housing is important, because that's how people are using it right now. That is the reality. If we look at the numbers, we have a very high percentage of people that are using our shelters as de facto housing. And so let's give them the supports that they need so they can succeed and move on, and not continue to call this a shelter, not providing them the supports that they need. So I think acknowledging that, knowing the populations that we're trying to help is extremely important. I think that's something that this report does, is saying, we understand the needs of the population that we're trying to serve, and we're trying to put our best foot forward to serve these populations. So thanks, staff. I think this is a great first step forward. Thanks everybody that has been involved in the sector, and it's good to see Council continue to move forward on this, and having a commitment to get it done. So thank you. Okay, can we move the motions as a package? You want one by one? Okay. So motion 1, Councillor Christian Wong-Tam. All those in favor? That carries. Motion 2, all those in favor? That carries. Motion 3, all those in favor? That carries. Motion 4, all those in favor? That carries. Item as amended. All those in favor? That carries. Okay. Item 3.6. Intergovernmental action to address housing and homelessness issues. We have a speaker, Logan Choi.
They're appointed for our needs. I'm speaking for the City of Toronto. There's a book here on history about Italy and Canada from 1938. There's also a thing here about Sir Joseph Paul. He's a public servant from 1901. He was appointed, he's born in Charlottetown, Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, okay? He served the Canadian people, and he got anointed as the highest rank as a knight, commando, because he came to Canada and seen lynching going on. Peterborough is a place that there is black people that won the war of 1812. This lady was called Nanny the Maroon. She's from Jamaica. She defeated the British. She came here to help this country to win that war. This is a native people, and this is how Canadian become native Nova Scotians, because they're black and native. We don't get recognition for this part of history in Canada 250 years now. And I know you guys don't understand anything I'm saying because none of you guys seem to know your history. The only thing I can see that you guys care about is your pocket. But there's 40 years to develop the Canadian people and the future of that generation. You guys should be held contempt for murdering people and not doing what the monarch wanted you to do with $50 billion that you guys just got. You guys are selling crown land that's supposed to house the next generation of Canadian. This is how Regent Park got started. And now you guys basically trying to go backward in history and take that rights from the people of this land. This is something that is genocide you guys are doing and complaining about what problem that you guys created. Where is the next development? It's been over 50 years now and people are waiting on housing. And you guys are still talking about the whole ways? There's $50 billion. You guys had this on the budget last year. Why you guys are pretending that you don't know your history? Ma'am, I would like to know, you have a lovely accent. Where are you from? I got 5 minutes.
And this is not a question
I
for
want to
staff.
know where you guys are from and what part of the city do you represent, if it's only a part of a town or is it the whole city? Do you get elected to represent the people that you're elected for or not? I have questions that none of you guys would answer, and I don't want to hear any questions from you guys more than a question is for the public, not for one individual. We take an oath as a Canadian. It doesn't seem like you guys understand that oath. These are crown land that you're putting condos on and talking about things are for sale. There's only 35% for federal and 38% for provincial to own the land. The private sector is only 11%. Why is the private sector going up more than what the land is? You guys want to talk about history? Or you want to talk about profit? You want to talk about how to help people, humane, or trying to say that you guys have no humanity? Which one is it? Because if you guys care, you would know there is rules in place to help people. You guys are marginalizing people and basically a class war. The one who have and the one who have not. But you're Canadian. We are known as peacekeepers. Yes, we're soldier right now because we're not at war. But I know that the Canadian people are at war as well. Because last year I was in Windsor, and there was a army ship and 4 helicopters, and we only had 1 defense plane. There's an army ship on any border, that means that we are at war. So who is these invaders? And what I'm looking at right now, I'm guaranteed there's half of you guys in this caucus.
Sir.
There's 25 people that got cut from the Ford administration out of 45 people to vote. There's only one side to vote against the people and one side to stand up for the people. What I see right now is the people against the people. Where is the next 25 councillors that's supposed to stand up for our rights?
Thank you for your deputation today. I'll see if anyone has any questions for you. Sorry, I had to take the chair.
You think we don't know what's going on here? And I will let the Canadian people know what's going on.
Are there any questions for our deputant? Thank you for coming today. Appreciate that.
We'll vote for you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Next speaker, Kira Heineck.
All right. Thank you for letting me speak, or the opportunity to speak again today on this issue. Many of you will remember the role that Toronto Alliance to End Homelessness played in helping bring this motion forward in December, and have heard deputations before when we have promoted the idea of some form of emergency response table for people living in homelessness right now. This goes beyond those who are chronically homeless or those who are in need of supportive housing, but just who experience homelessness right now. So I was glad to see the report come back, but I did want to just share a few thoughts from the Alliance and a couple of recommendations. One is pretty simple. Just the report suggests that the letter to officials that was sent in terms of setting up the intergovernmental working group went to Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation at the federal government. It may have also gone to ESDC, Employment Social Development Canada, but if it didn't, it should, because they're the folks who administer Reaching Home, which are resources for addressing homelessness and investing in homelessness services, and they should be at the table too. In particular, because they sponsor coordinated access and by name lists and all the innovations that SSHA is already running with, but with them at the table, perhaps we could achieve more faster. The second thing is that I understand that letters have gone to provincial staff also to join, but perhaps it's time to raise this issue to the political level. There is some resistance or some inability for provincial staff to join this type of working group without political approval, I guess, or support. So anything that can happen to raise the urgency of this kind of intergovernmental working group to the political level would be necessary. Thirdly, and given the urgency that we keep talking about and have underscored in earlier items today, we'd like to suggest that similar to what Councillor Perks has noted before in terms of what the city can do on its own, and what we have also recognized as city leadership in the previous item in terms of investing own resources, we strongly encourage the city and this committee to make a motion that we set something up similar to the working group to house Syrian refugees from a few years ago. I believe Councillor Cressy was the chair. And this working group was interdivisional with the City of Toronto. Yes, they had representatives, one each from the government, but the work was done here with staff from the relevant staff who could make decisions quickly from all the divisions and the community who had resources to bear. So we believe strongly that in a partnership with the Alliance and other stakeholders in the community and the right city staff, we can triage our resources and quickly move people out of homelessness. And this speaks to those who are there only for economic reasons, because it would be tied to, if we're serious about really stepping up again as a city and tackling this, some additional rent supplements so that we can access what is available in the private rental market more readily. You've heard many say how difficult that is. Part of the reason is the rent supplements aren't high enough. If we had $1,000 a month per person for even a short period, we could get a lot of people out of shelter really quickly who are there, who don't need supports to move back into housing and to keep it and to can keep doing or get back on their feet. So that's the third one. And then fourth, just to keep thinking, even in this context, of the role of the supportive housing provider and the growth plan that we're working on. It's a supportive housing provider who is really at the nexus of a more client-focused approach to solving these problems and can bring the resources to bear or through a table like the Alliance that the city can't compel. So some of those provincial supplements, some federal action, federal dollars. So I'll leave it at that with those sort of suggestions to strengthen things, but I guess our main point is we really have to act now, and we would like to be part of a Made in Toronto emergency response table to take a triaged case management approach to getting people out of shelter right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Kira. So if I was listening right, you're telling us that through the networks that you have of housing professionals and public servants in different orders of government, that there's a willingness on the part of the federal government to participate, there's a willingness on the part of the city to participate, there's a willingness on the part of the provincial public service to participate, but there's a political hole of getting the provincial government to participate.
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you for that intelligence.
Any other questions? Councillor, I just would like to, so Councillor Fletcher had to leave. I have to leave at 5 o'clock, so we'll lose quorum in 15 minutes. And we have more speakers, and we still have another item. Thank you. Councillor Wong Tam?
Thank you. What would need to change in order for us to be more effective at creating outcomes? Like, this report it doesn't have any gravitas. It has no outcomes.
Just to clarify, do you mean the outcome of actually getting this emergency response table working, or do you mean getting people housed?
Actually, the original emergency response, because we needed to be able to sort of crack the whip and say, how do we bring three orders of government together? And we were told that declaring an emergency is not going to do anything. It's just going to, we're already doing as much of as we possibly can. So let's set the city manager loose, and he is going to go off and get us some results and report back this meeting. And we now have a 4-page report signed by at least 3 individuals plus the city manager, deputy city manager. That's 4 major individuals, and it tells us that you're going to get another report in June that will tell us exactly what's happening. So we're kind of missing the mark here. What did we do wrong?
Oh, I don't know if anything was done wrong. I mean, there's only so far you can compel other orders of government to work with you. And I think I've tried to identify some of the barriers that I've learned about. But I think what we need to do is just do it. And that we have the model of the Syrian refugee emergency table. My understanding as well, and we have the terms of reference and the work plans that can be shared from that time, that it worked really well. And the city was able to find and house and settle a whole bunch of people very quickly. I think it's not the solution forever, the long-term solution, but we can do better for hundreds of people immediately if we all got around a table and shared our resources, identified some shorter-term regulatory changes that we might need in order to stack benefits around people, wrap supports around people. But also, as I said, if there was an ability to have a 2 or 3 year commitment from the city for a set of $1,000 rent supplements, we could use those for people before they become chronically homeless and get them out of shelters and back into housing and back to their lives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Emily Daigle.
See, raised tables aren't just for the disabled, are they? We all can use them. So very quickly, Councillor Bailio, I know you've got to go, and I just want to keep this short and sweet and sassy as usual. I've been here for almost everything today because accessibility is so vital, and as usual, I'm the only one in a wheelchair that showed up, or the only one with visual impairments that showed up. Fighting for accessibility as always. It's basically a foregone conclusion that we've lost the support of the provincial government. Unfortunately, even the accessibility minister has not really been there for us with disabilities, much less for rent control or subsidized rent. Would be nice, unfortunately. Our federal counterpart in the accessibility realm has a visual impairment like I do. And so I've heard her speak many times about accessibility and housing and stuff. And I also think we should rope in those agencies that are used to dealing with people with disabilities nationally. March of Dimes, Easter Seals, ABC, Alliance for the Equality of Blind Canadians, not just reach out intergovernmentally, but reach out to our friends, to our people who know how to do this, people who can help us. Because unfortunately, government-wise, it's been a slow, steady decline in assisted living, in rent geared to income, proper RGI. There are the 3P doesn't work. I've seen it happen. Private partners, they want money. They want to make money. Are we getting the National Co-op Federation to help us? It's simple as that. We need to work all three levels. We need to work together. And if one level isn't going to be there for us for rent and help, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Thank you. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But seriously, we have three levels of government. One of them is not at the table. We know that. It's unfortunately a known fact. So how do we do this with us and the federal? How do we do this and try to get the provincial back in? You know, I wish we could all team together and just get this stuff done, but I don't know how realistic that is at this point in time with the attitude that is up the street. I thank you for listening to me today, but I also thank you for thinking about accessibility, not only as a word, not only as a hope, but accessibility for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And that was any questions? Seeing none, that was the last speaker for this item. Questions of staff? Seeing none. Speakers, Councillor Perks.
So I have a motion that City Council direct the City Manager to formally invite the provincial government to participate in an intergovernmental working group to address housing and homelessness. It's self-explanatory.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
I think the motion is helpful, but I think we've also learned that these tables need to be charged and led by politicians in order for the staff to feel empowered to move ahead with the same type of energy to participate. And I know every time I try to do this, I'm told that I can't do it because the mayor is already doing enough to solve everything. But I really believe that the mayor needs to be asked, or politely asked, to sit with the city manager to do this work. So can you amend this to direct the mayor and the city manager to formally, or request the mayor and the city manager to formally invite the provincial and federal governments to participate in the intergovernmental working group to address housing and homelessness?
Without taking away from the mayor's ability to solve all problems by himself.
Understood.
I do think it is politically valuable for every member of City Council to vote on this at City Council, so it's all of us together. The mayor can vote for it. He can write any letter or make any phone call anytime he wants. I want City Council as a united body. I mean, maybe the Premier's nephew won't vote with us, to vote on this and make it clear we all want to see this happen.
So,
but I mean, tell you what, a side effect of this motion is, instead of receiving the report, it goes to council. Let's you and I and some others talk between now and council about whether this is the right way to do it, and we can amend it there. Fair enough?
I would welcome the opportunity to work on this, because I think there are a number of recommendations that came forward from Kira that we could probably add. I recognize that it's getting late in the day, but I just want to, and maybe I'll just speak to it when it's time to speak. So thank you. Yes, I will work with you on that.
Okay. Councillor Wong-Tam to speak.
Yes, thank you. And I'm going to try to keep it really short, but I'm a little fatigued, not because the day is long, but because this issue has come back before us time and time again, and we said that we are going to deal with this as an emergency, and that we didn't need to declare emergency, but we're going to move like our asses and houses, and fire was on fire because our lives were hanging on the edge. And so it's a little bit disheartening to see that after I was told we didn't need to declare emergency, that a 4-page report come back and says, this is all we got. And we'll come back to you in 6 months to tell you how far we get in 6 months. I don't want to err. This is not, it's not a slight on staff, but I really believe this has everything to do with the fact that we keep dropping the ball at City Council and at this committee, where we actually didn't take up the charge last December. And further to that, almost a year ago, 2 years ago, when we first started talking about what a declaration of emergency would look like, we were told that nothing is going to happen, you're not going to get any more results, and that everything is already being done. That was 2 years ago. And then a year ago, the mayor also committed, even after a very messy council vote, that he was, even though he voted not to support the council motion, that he would take it upon himself to convene this same intergovernmental working group to move towards ending homelessness. So that was 2 years as a milestone, 1 year as a milestone, and only in December do we say we don't need it. So that's why I'm a little fatigued, is because we keep saying we can do it, and we don't do it, and here we are. So I'll work with you, Councillor Perks, to see if we can improve this even further before we get to council, but I'm not encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Seeing none. So I would like to speak on this item. So the Councillor Perks actually motion is already part of the report. This was one of the recommendations in the No, but the initial report asked the city manager to do exactly this. So that has been done. Sharing the frustration, to be honest with everybody, that Councillor Wong Tam has expressed, because I do think we have very charged, emotional discussions about this issue every November and December, because we don't do the work that we should be doing now in the beginning of the year, throughout the year, getting the conversations going, getting this addressed. I did meet with the minister yesterday. I asked him about this. He wasn't aware, and he's looking into this to get this started. So, provincial, yes. So, Councillor, I share the frustration. I was expecting a more robust report in front of us today. I think that there's more work that needs to be done with the sector and obviously with the other orders of government. I share that with you, and that's why I asked for the meeting, and this was a key item on the agenda. And all I can say is that I'm happy to involve you as part of those conversations, because I know that you're passionate about this issue and to work with you. But I don't think that we need to send another letter. The conversations are happening. So, Councillor Perks, I would even ask you for you to consider to withdraw the motion, given... Nope. Okay. Given that this has been done and it didn't work, and conversations are ongoing. So I would just ask that the committee takes that in consideration. And
in fact, if my motion doesn't pass, I'm going to vote against the motion to receive, because I want this to go to council one way or the other. Okay. So let's vote on the motion. Is that Councillor Perks' motion? All those in favor? All those against it? And that fails on a tie. Item. Motion to adopt the item. All those in favor? Motion against? And that fails? Yeah. Item goes to council without recommendations. Okay. And item 3.8, building affordable housing in City Place at Block 36. We have a speaker, Mark Richardson.
I'm going to bang through this as quickly as possible for you, councillors. We've also, in addition to adding in our mapping around the Housing Now sites, we're starting to go back and map all of your open doors sites from 2015 onwards to see whether you've actually been able to deliver on open doors sites or not. The site we're talking about at at City Place is one of the 4 sites you proposed in 2015 as part of the fast track pilot for open doors in 2015. 200 Madison, 505 Richmond, 150 Harrison, and this Block 36 North site. 5 years later, 200 Madison, they've just moved into, but it actually predates open doors. It dates back to like 2008, so it took about 12 years to get 80 units on that site. Richmond's under construction, but both Block 36 North and the 150 Harrison site are currently still empty fields, 5 years after you approved affordable housing on those sites. Anybody who looked at this plan in 2015 could have told you it was going to fail. It was destined to fail because you were talking about building an 80-unit building in City Place. And the construction costs in City Place are really, really difficult. Just getting out of the ground costs a lot of money there. You're not going to get to the sort of numbers you're talking about. You say 40,000 units of affordable housing, right? This is 80 units. It would mean you'd have to build 500 of these buildings in the next 10 years. That's approving one of these buildings in this built form every week, pretty much, for the next decade. I don't think Mr. Lintern's staff have the bandwidth to do one a week at the moment. So it's an empty field right now. And this is an opportunity to bring it back in-house, and your 10-minute walk to the CN Tower from there, it's going to be right next to Rail Deck Park. It's a great location. You're not the only people who are having this problem. Vancouver has this problem. And potentially, you know, Ms. Bond, who's just come from Vancouver, can talk about this. They had 20 proposals that were selected in 2018 for an affordable housing project. In 2019, 30% of them had walked away from the deals that they'd agreed to because the math just didn't work. The math has to work on every single site. In Councillor Bradford's ward, we've had the same issue with the affordable housing site at Upper Gerrard and Coxwell. That was 33 units of affordable housing, but city staff said it needed 42 underground parking spaces. Like, we can't be having these kind of conversations if we're serious about affordable housing at speed, at scale in 2020. So I'm going to apologize to Councillor Perks for this slide. Does it pencil? That is, you know, we disagree with all kinds of stuff, but I think we agree on the math. We need to be able to pay for these buildings. They have to be viable. Part of the way we make them viable is to do the density and the built form that makes the math work. So our volunteers, I've talked to affordable housing developers. We have talked to affordable housing operators. We are pitching this into the ether as a way you can make this building viable in 2020. It's 22 stories. It's 282 units. It's a very simple built form. It is optimized to be run by a not-for-profit and mixed income. It includes supportive and transitional units. The unit breakdowns are there. The square footage per units are there. Some people may be concerned about the small size of the bachelor units, but if we want supportive units, those supportive units are small units that are partnered up with larger units for sort of a co-living type relationship. We're happy to dig into more details on these. You can see from the examples in these renderings, we're not even talking about the biggest building in the neighborhood, but this is the kind of built form you need to be doing on a regular basis if you want to reach all the other targets you've talked about today. So we're asking you to assign this City Place site to Create TO, ask them to include it in the 2020 Housing Now list, throw away all the affordable design guidelines that failed to deliver affordable housing on this site in 2015, give staff an explicit direction to maximize the number of affordable housing units you can locate on this site. And every time somebody comes to you with an affordable housing proposal, just ask the question, does it pencil? And that's it from us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Any questions? Very helpful. Seeing none, that's it. So no more speakers on this item. Any questions?
Not to deputate on this item.
Sorry?
I was asked by you sent the clerk over to me earlier.
So I have to leave for a meeting, so we can, we have to either adjourn the meeting.
Simple. Silence is accessibility. Simple as that.
You're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Finish my 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Item,
Who's coming to Dubuque? Emily, could you please come up? Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
It's not even going to be 2 minutes. So I was hoping to get this in while Anna was here because she's an amazing counselor. And she fights for people in her community that are like me. Simple as this. Before this even gets built, started, planned, put accessibility on the table. Put accessibility at the start of any design of any building. Visitability. Simple as that. Don't silence accessibility. Don't put it as an afterthought. Put it as the initial planning of every single site coming. The next item Anna's put on was important as well, but this one, this land, there needs to be 15% accessible. I beg you, put accessibility within the lens when you're beginning the development. It's easier to plan ahead for accessibility than plan it in later. Any planner can tell you that. I've talked to several planners about this thing because I'm interested in it, and they've said the same thing. Please build it into the thought before and not after. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of our deputant? Thank you, Emily. Bring this into committee. Any questions of staff? Any speakers? Yes, Councillor Wong-Tam.
Was anybody intending to move the staff recommendation, or are there any amendments, or should I just do it?
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just move the staff recommendations. And also, just Emily, for your reference, I'm just going to, I will undertake and speak to Councillor Cressy about including perhaps some amendment language in the, when we get to council about asking for greater accessibility for additional units. I just want to make sure you hear that, but I want to consult with the councillor first. And that's it.
This is Councillor Cressy's recommendation.
Yeah.
The stuff. So you're moving the letter, recommendations in the letter. Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Is there any other business? Yes. Yes, we have one more. It is your letter, I believe, Councillor Wong-Tam, that you put on, new piece of business, PH 1310, strengthening security policies for vacant buildings.
Yes, and thank you. I don't think anyone needs to speak to it. I would just ask that the committee would adopt the recommendation. And just very quickly, we've had a number of incidents, and I suspect there are other councillors who've experienced the same thing, where properties are sitting vacant, perhaps either intentionally left abandoned by landowners or perhaps speculators, and during that interim period of vacancy before they actually get a zoning approval or perhaps there's going to be a new use, those buildings are violated. The security is breached. People go in and they vandalize the property, or there's arson, even worse. And we have had two incidents. We had 3 incidents in Ward 13 in a very short period of time, and one of those incidents actually resulted in 2 firefighters falling through the wood boards. And because these properties are oftentimes aged, which means they have timber framing, we know that they become very dangerous when they're left alone. So it's dangerous to the people breaking into the buildings, it's dangerous to the first responders, and it's also dangerous to the community where those properties are sitting vacant because the fire can spread very quickly. The only thing I'm asking is, what can we do to actually eliminate that policy gap? And can we have this report come back by the 4th quarter of 2020? Thank you.
Thank you. I understand you've amended that from the original letter that you sent around 3 times, 3rd time lucky. All right, let's vote, unless you want to ask staff any questions. Anybody any questions? No? And there you go. So let's have a vote on that. All in favor of that recommendation? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you very much. And now we're going to move to adjourn. Thank you for all your efforts and a long day. Very successful. Good day.